A former cop saved a woman's life. He had no idea who she really was. Days later, he receives an invitation that changes everything. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Jacob Miller gazed at the rain-soaked streets of Los Angeles through the high windows of the commercial building where he worked as a night security guard. It was nearly 2 a.m., and the glow of neon signs reflected on the puddles that had pooled around the block. At 45, he felt every hour of his past weigh upon his shoulders. Not too long ago, he had been a respected member of the LAPD, a detective with hopes of making a difference. Now, wearing a generic security uniform and pacing empty hallways, he found himself haunted by regrets he could scarcely name. He had grown used to these long, solitary hours. The hum of fluorescent lights in the lobby was a companion of sorts. Sometimes, Jacob would catch his reflection on the polished marble floor, tall, still in decent shape from former years of training, with short, dark hair salted by streaks of grey. Despite his broad shoulders and steady posture, the lines around his eyes spoke of exhaustion. Each footstep echoed, reminding him of the man he used to be, the one who responded to danger with unwavering confidence. Jacob's shift ended at dawn. Outside, the rain persisted, turning the city's usual hustle into a slosh of cautious traffic and damp sidewalks. He pulled his hood over his head, heading to an aging sedan parked in a cramped lot behind the building. The engine sputtered to life. As he navigated the slick roads toward his modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood, he caught fleeting memories of his police days. The sharper uniform, the precinct's camaraderie, the sense of purpose that once carried him forward. Those memories were overshadowed by one haunting event from 5 years ago. A misjudgment he had made during a major operation had cost his partner, Randall Murphy, his life. The department's internal investigation cleared Jacob of criminal wrongdoing, but he blamed himself for ignoring a crucial piece of intelligence. Over time, that guilt had become a burden too heavy to bear. Despite well-meaning offers from his superiors to remain on the force, Jacob submitted his resignation and sought the anonymity of private security jobs. By the time he arrived at his apartment building, the city was stirring to life. He climbed the worn steps to the second floor, passing by Harold Knight's door, a Vietnam veteran in his 60s who sometimes shared a kind word with Jacob. This morning, the door opened, and Harold peeked out with his usual concerned smile. "Morning, son," Harold said, pushing aside frayed curtains. "Heard you come in. Another quiet night?" Jacob offered a polite nod. "I guess so." Rain kept people inside. Harold studied him with a gaze that seemed to pierce beyond the surface. "You look tired. Don't let yourself get too lost in your thoughts." Jacob forced a small smile. "Thanks. I'm fine. Just need some rest." He continued to his own apartment, which smelled faintly of old coffee and laundry detergent. The living room was sparse, a small couch, a television, and a beaten-up bookshelf stacked with law enforcement manuals he could not bring himself to discard. Sleep beckoned. But first, he sorted through a stack of mail, bills mostly, along with a reminder from the bank about an upcoming payment. The quiet beep of his phone signaled a text message from Miguel Vasquez, his closest friend from the old days. "Hey, buddy, you doing okay? Let's grab lunch soon." Jacob typed a quick reply, grateful for Miguel's unwavering support even after he left the force. But he felt a pang of reluctance, uncertain if he could muster the energy to meet up. Sighing, he placed the phone aside, trying to ignore the pangs of regret that still gnawed at him. He kicked off his shoes and sank into the worn couch, letting the rhythmic drumming of rain against the window lull him into a shallow rest. His sleep was restless, plagued by the same recurring nightmare, a dark alley, gunshots echoing, Randall collapsing in slow motion. He jolted awake, heart pounding, the midday sun now streaming through the blinds. Rubbing his eyes, he stood and wandered into the cramped kitchenette, splashing water on his face. The reflection in the mirror above the sink offered him a haunted stare he scarcely recognized. Jacob's mind drifted back to the days when every morning brought a new case, and he felt the thrill of upholding the law. Now, each day bled into the next, with the monotony of corridor patrols and the sting of suppressed guilt. His fridge held little more than leftover takeout and a few bottles of water. He grabbed a soda, contemplating whether this was truly all life had left for him. Yet, beneath his weariness, a faint ember of duty remained. He had once vowed to protect and serve. Though no longer wearing the badge, part of him refused to relinquish that principle. Little did he know that within days, circumstances would ignite that ember into a flame, setting him on a path that would challenge his deepest fears and offer a chance at redemption he could barely imagine. The late-night shift had stretched into the first hours of dawn when Jacob decided to leave work a little earlier than usual. The storm clouds loomed again, thick and menacing, threatening to unleash torrents upon the city. A distant rumble of thunder echoed among the tall buildings, prompting him to hurry out onto the sidewalk. He turned onto a dimly lit side street, hoping to reach his car before the sky opened up. That was when he heard it, a sharp cry, muffled yet urgent. Instinct flicked on like a switch, his senses heightened, each nerve recalling years of training in the LAPD. Looking ahead, he spotted the faint silhouette of two figures cornering a smaller shape against the concrete wall of a closed boutique. Without hesitation, Jacob sprinted forward, ignoring the damp chill seeping through his coat. As he drew closer, he could make out a woman's strained voice. "Get away!" she snapped, clearly frightened. One of the men hissed something back, too low for Jacob to understand. "Hey!" Jacob shouted, stepping into the weak glow of a flickering street lamp. "Leave her alone!" The men turned to face him. One was lanky with a hood pulled over a bald head, the other heavier set, wearing an expression of startled irritation. The heavier one raised his voice. "Mind your own business, old man!" Jacob's training kicked in. He sized them up, 2-on-1. They looked agitated but not well coordinated. The cornered woman, her jacket plastered to her body by the earlier drizzle, stared at Jacob with wide eyes. He advanced carefully. "Let her go," he said, voice calm, stance steady. Inside, he felt the familiar adrenaline surge, stirring memories of countless confrontations. The bald man swore under his breath and shoved the woman. She stumbled, nearly falling. That was enough for Jacob. He lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm. They tussled against the wall, the impact knocking down a trash can with a loud crash. The heavier man tried to swing at Jacob, but Jacob ducked and countered with a forceful elbow to the ribs. Breathing hard, he glanced around to ensure the woman was safe. She had backed away, trembling, watching in a mixture of fear and relief. The confrontation lasted no more than a few seconds before both aggressors realized they were outmatched. The bald man cursed, pulling his friend backward. They retreated down the alley, muttering threats as they disappeared into the darkness. Jacob turned to the woman. She was still pressed against the wall, clutching her purse to her chest. Her breathing was rapid, and her eyes darted, trying to process what had just happened. "Are you hurt?" Jacob asked, stepping closer but maintaining a careful distance so as not to startle her. She shook her head, pushing damp strands of hair away from her face. In the faint light, he could see her features clearly, strong cheekbones, expressive brown eyes, and an air of quiet confidence masked by the current distress. She was probably in her late 30s, dressed in a stylish blazer and knee-length skirt, the ensemble now wrinkled and damp. "I think I'm okay," she said, her voice steady despite a slight tremor. "They just came out of nowhere. Thank you." I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Jacob glanced over his shoulder, but the alley was silent now except for the distant roar of traffic. Could have been a mugging, he offered, though something about it felt off. Any idea why they targeted you? She blinked, as if pondering how much to reveal. No, not really. I guess I just looked like an easy mark tonight. Then she drew a shaky breath. I'm Amanda, by the way. Amanda Collins. Jacob, he replied, offering a curt nod. He noticed a slight tear in her jacket sleeve and a scratch on her forearm. You sure you're all right? Amanda followed his gaze to the scratch, realizing for the first time she was bleeding slightly. It's just a scrape, I'll be fine. She took another moment to steady herself before adding, Could you walk me to my car? It's just around the corner. Jacob agreed without hesitation. The two of them headed down the alley, the storm clouds finally releasing a drizzle. With one hand, Jacob shielded Amanda from the heavier drops, guiding her carefully around puddles. In the dim streetlight, he caught a glimpse of her staring at him with an expression that mixed gratitude and curiosity. When they reached a sleek black sedan parked at the curb, Amanda thanked him again, her voice soft but resolute. Jacob offered her a faint smile. I'm glad you're okay. He meant every word. She slipped into the driver's seat, hesitating as if about to say more. Instead, she closed the door gently. Jacob stepped back onto the curb, rain intensifying, uncertain if their paths would ever cross again. The next moment, her sedan pulled away, the taillights glowing red in the swirling mist. A single day had passed since Jacob's late-night altercation with the would-be assailants, and his thoughts were still firmly anchored to that moment. He tried to go about his usual routine, sleeping through the day, working the night shift. But the memory of Amanda Collins remained at the forefront of his mind. There had been something undeniably unsettling about the way those men had confronted her. It hadn't felt like a random mugging. During his break at the security desk, he found himself pulling out a notepad to jot down half-formed theories, names, descriptions, possible motives. Old habits from his detective days resurfaced, and he questioned whether he should reach out to an old friend in the department for more details. Then he tossed the notepad aside, reminding himself that he was no longer a cop. After the shift, he emerged into the pinkish-orange light of dawn. Exhaustion tugged at him, but curiosity ate at him more. Before heading home, he dialed Miguel Vasquez. It took a few rings before the familiar gruff voice came on the line. "Jake, my man," Miguel greeted. "Been a while since I heard from you this early. Everything all right?" Jacob shifted the phone to his other ear. "I'm good, just something came up." He briefly summarized the incident with Amanda, omitting certain details. "It felt strange," he admitted. "You think you could ask around, see if there's been any chatter about similar attacks?" Miguel was silent for a moment. "I can ask, but if you stumbled into something bigger, maybe you should report it, or let me handle it through official channels." Jacob exhaled, pressing a hand to his temple. "Right. I'll leave it with you. Thanks, Mig." He hung up, staring at his phone for a long minute. Part of him wanted to track down Amanda, just to make sure she was truly safe. But he told himself it wasn't his problem anymore. He was a private citizen now, a man trying to move on from a past that still clung to him like a persistent shadow. Later that afternoon, he stood at his kitchen counter, sipping a cup of coffee and flipping through the local news on his phone. There was nothing about the assault. There was, however, a small piece about a prominent attorney named Amanda Collins, who had recently taken on a high-profile corruption case. Jacob paused, reading the article carefully. It mentioned her reputation for fearlessness in the courtroom, her knack for defending clients against powerful adversaries. It never hinted at any danger she might be in. He set the phone aside, unsettled. The woman in the article certainly seemed more formidable than the vulnerable figure he had seen, but everyone could be vulnerable under the right circumstances. His next shift that night was uneventful, leaving him more time alone with his thoughts than he cared for. Around midnight, he caught himself gazing out at the city lights, recalling the adrenaline surge of that alleyway. For the first time since he resigned from the LAPD, he had felt alive, tapping into muscle memory he thought he'd buried. That frightened him almost as much as the altercation itself, because it reminded him how deeply he missed the sense of purpose he once had. As he patrolled the corridors, a voice at the back of his mind played through scenarios. What if he'd arrived a minute later? What if she had been badly hurt? The realization that he might never know the full story gnawed at him. Yet the fear of getting too involved, of messing up again, anchored him to his current state of cautious detachment. Near the end of his shift, he tried to push thoughts of Amanda aside. After all, she was safe now, presumably continuing with her life of high-stakes law. Meanwhile, he had rent to pay and bills piling up. He reminded himself that his primary concern needed to be keeping this security job. On his way out, his supervisor, a heavy-set man named Duncan Reed, noticed Jacob's distracted demeanor. "Miller, you feeling okay? You been zoning out more than usual?" Jacob forced a smile. "I'm fine, Duncan. Just didn't sleep well. The storm kept me up." Duncan grunted. "Make sure you're sharp on the job. We've had some vandalism complaints on the upper floors. I need you at your best." Jacob nodded, muttering something in agreement. As he walked away, he recognized that sense of guilt creeping in again, guilt that he wasn't truly present in his own life, that he kept replaying a scene that might never matter in the grand scheme of things. He told himself he would let it go, convinced that the best course was to remain distant. Little did he realize that the distance he tried to keep would soon vanish, pulled away by events already in motion. By the time the weekend arrived, the storm had subsided, leaving Los Angeles under a clear, vivid sky that offered a brief reprieve from the usual smog. Jacob tried to use the sunny afternoon to clear his head. He walked along a local park, nodding at joggers and elderly couples feeding ducks by the pond. It was quiet enough that the echoes of the city seemed distant, yet the mental noise surrounding Amanda's strange attack refused to quiet. His phone rang, jolting him out of his reverie. Seeing Miguel's caller ID, he quickly answered. "Hey, got anything?" Miguel's voice sounded cautious. "Jake, I spoke with a couple of guys at the precinct. There's no official report matching your description, no mention of an attempted mugging near that alley, but there's some talk about a high-profile attorney receiving threats. It's hush-hush, so there's not much detail." "Would that be Amanda Collins?" Jacob's heartbeat quickened. "Possibly, though the detective I talked to didn't confirm a name. He said something about a major corruption case. So yeah, that fits. I'm guessing that might be your lawyer friend." Jacob muttered a low curse under his breath. "I knew something was off." Miguel paused. "Listen, man, you might want to stay out of this. If she's involved in a big case, there could be dangerous people looking to shut her down. Last thing you need is to get tangled up." Jacob let out a weary sigh. "I understand. Thanks." He ended the call, pocketing his phone with a mix of gratitude and frustration. Although he wanted to heed Miguel's warning, a part of him couldn't help feeling responsible for Amanda's safety. After all, he had been the one to break up the assault. He couldn't shake the thought that she might be a target, not of some random criminals, but of well-connected individuals with lethal means. That evening, back in his apartment, he tried to distract himself by flicking through channels on TV. When that failed, he settled at his worn desk and pulled up a search engine. He typed Amanda Collins attorney and found pages of results. Her photograph appeared alongside headlines about significant cases, one involving a city council official suspected of embezzlement, another defending a tech entrepreneur embroiled in a fraud scandal. She was well known for her tenacity and was rumored to be unstoppable in the courtroom. Jacob leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Her professional reputation was formidable. Maybe that explained the men in the alley, though it was still unclear why they'd approach her in such a direct, brazen manner. The possibility that they were hired goons crossed his mind. If so, it meant Amanda had enemies who wouldn't hesitate to resort to intimidation or violence. The next day, he decided to set his curiosity aside and focus on his responsibilities. Yet, fate had other plans. As he finished his usual shift, he felt his phone vibrate. He checked the screen, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. A calm, female voice greeted him when he answered. "Hello, Mr. Miller. My name is Karen Reed. I work with Amanda Collins. She would like to speak with you, if you have a moment." Jacob tensed, feeling a surge of apprehension. He stepped out into the parking lot, away from the handful of people milling near the building entrance. "Sure," he said, swallowing the dryness in his throat. There was a brief pause before Amanda's voice came on. "Jacob, hi. I hope this call isn't a bad time." He closed his eyes, recalling how she had looked that rainy night. "No, it's fine. Everything okay?" A light sigh came through the line. "I wanted to thank you again for what you did. I never got to express it properly. And I also wanted to ask if you might be willing to meet. I promise it won't take much of your time." Jacob felt a flutter of unease. Part of him wanted to keep his distance, but he heard something genuine in her tone. "All right," he said slowly. "Just tell me where and when." They agreed on a small cafe in West Hollywood for the following afternoon. After hanging up, Jacob stood in the parking lot, staring at the city skyline. Something about Amanda's voice had stirred an impulse he thought he had buried. She had sounded both grateful and guarded. It reminded him of the vulnerability he had seen in her eyes that night. He glanced up at the fading daylight, wrestling with a wave of conflict. The sense of duty inside him was undeniable, but so was the memory of his old mistakes. As he climbed into his car, he wondered if he was stepping back into a world that had once brought him both purpose and unbearable regret. Yet something told him there was no turning back now, not if he wanted to reclaim any semblance of the man he used to be. Jacob arrived at the cafe in West Hollywood earlier than planned, a ball of tension knotting in his stomach. The place was modest, with a brick exterior and a large window overlooking the busy street. Inside, the warm lighting cast a comforting glow on rustic wooden tables. He chose a seat in the corner, where he could watch the entrance. Old habits died hard. A few minutes later, Amanda Collins walked in. Gone was the damp blazer from that night. She now wore a crisp beige suit with a pale blue blouse. Her hair was drawn back in a neat twist, and she carried herself with a composed air. Still, Jacob caught the flicker of relief in her eyes when she spotted him. "Thanks for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. The soft hum of chatter around them offered a semblance of privacy. Jacob nodded. "No problem. You wanted to talk?" Before she could respond, a server approached, handing them menus. They both ordered coffee. Amanda requested black with a dash of cream. Jacob went for a simple black brew. Once they were alone again, she leaned forward. "I'm not sure how much you know about me, or about what happened the other night," she said, her voice steady but tinged with caution. "I told the police what happened, but let's just say I'm not entirely confident in the response I got." Jacob studied her expression. He noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her coffee cup. "I know you're an attorney with some big cases. My friend at the precinct mentioned you might have received threats." She gave a tight smile. confirming his suspicions. Yes, threats have become almost routine. I've handled high-profile cases for years, so I'm no stranger to intimidation. But lately it's escalated. I suspect the men who cornered me that night were sent by someone who wants me to drop a case I'm working on. Jacob's jaw tightened. You seem like you can handle yourself. So why not hire professional bodyguards or a security detail? I already have a personal security consultant, she explained, glancing at her hands, but I'm beginning to realize there are gaps. My team does well at official events, but when it comes to unpredictable situations, I'm not fully confident. You handled yourself so efficiently that night, like someone who knows how to handle danger. He hesitated, feeling a swirl of pride and apprehension. I was with LAPD for many years, so I guess I've got some experience. Amanda's gaze flicked over him, assessing, so it's true. That explains your quick reflexes. I'm going to be direct. I'd like to offer you a job, not because I don't trust my existing security, but because I need someone with law enforcement experience who isn't part of the usual circles. Someone who can think independently and protect me without the potential biases of corporate or private agencies. Jacob's heart pounded. He remembered the excitement and the sense of duty that came from meaningful work, but memories of his old failures also rose to the surface. I'm not sure, he began. I left the force for a reason, and you don't even know me. She tilted her head slightly, a faint smile curving her lips. You saved my life, Jacob. That's a good start. I have a sense about people. Besides, I know at least a few things. You're brave, you have a strong moral compass, and you're not easily intimidated. He glanced at the street outside, a flurry of pedestrians hurrying past the window. I'm just a security guard now. Why not hire someone with fewer complications? Amanda sighed. I don't want a yes man. I want someone who can see the dangers I might overlook. Someone who won't hesitate to push back if I'm being careless. This case I'm working on is more dangerous than most. I suspect it involves influential figures who don't mind playing dirty. Their coffees arrived, and both took a moment to sip. The silence held weight. Jacob tried to gather his thoughts. He felt that old itch, the desire to do real good again. At the same time, the memory of losing Randall caused an ache in his chest. Could he risk placing himself in harm's way? And what if he failed again? Finally, Amanda reached into her handbag and pulled out a small envelope with embossed gold trim. This is an official invitation to join my team, with all the legal paperwork and details. Take it home, think it over. If you decide it's not for you, I understand. But I sincerely hope you'll accept. Jacob took the envelope. Its elegant feel, a stark contrast to the gritty alley where they had first crossed paths. He nodded, the tension in his stomach replaced by a surge of possibility. They exchanged a few more words, neither pushing the other for an immediate decision. Soon, Amanda stood, thanked him again, and left. Alone with his thoughts, Jacob stared at the envelope. A part of him felt terrified, another strangely exhilarated. He knew that if he crossed this threshold, he might never go back to the quiet anonymity he had carved out. Yet he couldn't deny the subtle spark of hope flickering inside him, offering a path that might lead to redemption, and perhaps even something more. Jacob stood by his living room window, the golden envelope from Amanda lying on the small coffee table. He had spent the better part of the night pacing, torn between his sense of responsibility and the lingering fear that he might fail again. Outside, the city lights of Los Angeles twinkled like scattered embers across the dark horizon. Everything looked calm, but Jacob knew chaos could be hiding behind any bright facade. Before dawn, he dialed Miguel's number. He didn't plan on revealing every detail, but he needed perspective from someone who understood both the rush and the risks of law enforcement. The phone rang a few times before Miguel picked up, his voice groggy with sleep. "Jake, it's 5 in the morning," Miguel murmured. Jacob ran a hand over his face, feeling a twinge of guilt. "I'm sorry, but I need your advice." Miguel cleared his throat. "All right." "Shoot," Jacob explained the gist. Amanda Collins, the attorney he'd rescued, wanted him to join her private security team. He left out the specifics of her case, focusing instead on his reluctance. "She's not just some average person. She's in deep with high-stakes cases, corruption, powerful enemies, and I'm not sure if diving into that world is smart for me." Miguel paused for a moment. "You've always had the heart for it, Jake. That's never been in question. But after what happened with your partner, you've been punishing yourself. Maybe this is your chance to get back into the kind of work that matters." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Or it could blow up in my face again." "That's a risk with any real police work," Miguel said gently. "Look, you have to decide if you want to keep hiding in a job that barely uses your talents or try to use them for good again. Just remember, you're not the same person you were 5 years ago." Jacob ended the call soon after, feeling both uneasy and strangely encouraged. At sunrise, he took the envelope to his small desk and opened it carefully. Inside was a formal contract outlining his duties, compensation, and the scope of work. There was also a handwritten note from Amanda. Jacob, I understand your reservations, but I see in you a strength and integrity that can help keep me safe, and keep others safe too. I need someone who can stand firm in the face of intimidation. Please give this a chance. Amanda Collins. He sighed and pulled out a pen. Later that day, Jacob found himself driving through the winding roads leading into the Hollywood Hills. At the crest of a secluded neighborhood, he arrived at a set of high wrought-iron gates. A small plaque read, "Collins Residence." He pressed the intercom and was buzzed in. The driveway curved around manicured hedges until it reached a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion. Stepping out of his old sedan, Jacob felt a moment of hesitation. The grandeur of the estate contrasted sharply with his own cramped apartment and the stale corridors he used to patrol. As he walked up the stone steps, he was greeted by Karen Reed, the same assistant who had called him earlier. "Welcome," Karen said, offering a warm smile. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a crisp navy blazer. She seemed calm, yet her eyes flickered with watchful intelligence. "Amanda's just finishing a conference call. She'll be with you shortly." Karen led Jacob inside, past polished marble floors and modern art hanging on cream-colored walls. The house was elegant, yet there was an undercurrent of formality. It felt more like a functional space for important gatherings than a cozy home. Jacob noticed discreet cameras mounted at key vantage points, a testament to the heightened sense of security that Amanda's lifestyle demanded. They reached a study that overlooked a lush garden. Through the glass doors, Jacob saw a well-tended lawn, rose bushes, and a gazebo. Karen offered him a seat. "Please wait here. Amanda should be free in a moment." Jacob thanked her, taking in the decor, a wall of law books, a heavy wooden desk adorned with legal briefs, and framed newspaper clippings celebrating Amanda's courtroom victories. Everything spoke of her professional achievements, but he sensed it also revealed the pressure she lived under. After a few minutes, Amanda entered. She had swapped her usual business suit for a simple burgundy blouse and black slacks, giving her a less formal appearance. "Jacob," she greeted, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." He stood, shaking her hand with a respectful nod. "I decided to sign the paperwork. Thought we should discuss next steps." A hint of relief flickered across her face. "I'm glad to hear it." "And I'm grateful." She invited him to sit on a leather couch across from hers. Her posture was relaxed, but there was a certain intensity in her eyes. "I'd like you to become part of my personal security detail immediately. My head of security is on board with this arrangement, though you'll be reporting directly to me for the time being." Jacob remembered Miguel's words about stepping back into meaningful work. "All right," he replied. "But I'll need to see how your current team operates. If there are gaps, I'll let you know." "That's exactly what I'm hoping for," Amanda said, her tone firm. "I need more than just a bodyguard. I need insight from someone who understands how criminals think and who won't be afraid to speak up if he sees danger." Jacob nodded. He looked around, absorbing the opulent surroundings. "I'll do what I can to keep you safe," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But I might not be the easiest person to work with. I have my own set of standards." Amanda met his gaze. "That's precisely why I wanted you, Jacob. I can deal with blunt honesty. In fact, I require it." Her candid confidence reminded him of the officers he respected most back in the day, people who refused to compromise, no matter the pressure. For a moment, he felt the echo of what it was like to be part of something bigger than himself. Karen reappeared at the threshold. "Ma'am, you have a call in 5 minutes." Amanda stood, extending her hand again to Jacob. "Shall we meet after dinner? I'll introduce you to the rest of the team and we'll start laying out a plan." Jacob agreed. As he followed Karen back through the grand hallway, he noticed a flutter of anticipation in his chest. After years of drifting in self-imposed exile, he sensed that a new chapter of his life had already begun. One where Amanda Collins might become more than just his employer, perhaps even the guide he needed to confront his own fears. That evening, Jacob stood outside his old workplace, a set of keys clutched in his hand. His supervisor, Duncan Reed, was waiting near the lobby door with a puzzled look. It wasn't often that employees showed up on their day off. "Duncan," Jacob began, voice subdued, "I've taken a new job, effective immediately." Duncan's brows shot up. "A new job, just like that." He eyed Jacob warily. "We were counting on you, Miller. Who's going to cover the night shift?" Jacob exhaled, meeting Duncan's gaze evenly. "I'm sorry for the short notice, but this opportunity came up fast. I appreciate everything you've done for me here." Duncan rolled his eyes, then shrugged. "Well, guess we'll manage. But I got to say, you were one of the reliable ones." Despite the tension, Jacob felt a twinge of gratitude at the compliment. He handed over his security badge. With that simple gesture, he realized he was cutting ties to the monotonous job that had both sheltered and stifled him for the past few years. It felt oddly liberating, yet a swirl of nerves churned in his stomach. "Good luck," Duncan muttered, taking the badge. "Whatever you're getting into, I hope it's worth it." Jacob nodded, then headed back to his sedan. He had arranged to gather his final paycheck later, but this moment of closure, however brusque, seemed to mark a definitive transition. Sitting behind the wheel, he stared at the building's glass doors for a long moment. The memory of endless nights patrolling empty corridors flickered in his mind. There had been something comforting in the routine, but comfort had never truly satisfied him. He turned the key in the ignition, feeling a surge of adrenaline as he drove away. Later, he arrived at Amanda's home, greeted by 2 uniformed guards at the gate who waved him in after checking his ID. In the foyer, he waited briefly until Karen appeared, leading him to a spacious living room where several people were gathered. Conversations hummed in low tones as Jacob entered. Amanda, now in a sleek black dress suitable for a professional dinner, stood by the marble fireplace. She beckoned him closer, gesturing to the group. "Jacob, "Meet my head of security, Nate Thompson," she said, indicating a muscular man in his early 40s with a closely cropped haircut. "And this is Lucinda Marquez, my media and public relations advisor." She nodded toward a poised woman in her 30s wearing a tailored suit. Jacob exchanged polite handshakes and noticed that although Nate had a firm grip, his expression remained unreadable. Lucinda gave a curt smile, her eyes darting between Jacob and Amanda as if already analyzing potential headlines. Behind them, a few other staff members chatted quietly. "As you know," Amanda continued, her voice projecting calm authority, "I've hired Jacob to provide an additional layer of personal security. He has prior law enforcement experience, and I trust his instincts. I'll expect you all to coordinate with him. Nate, please share whatever protocols we currently have in place." Nate's jaw flexed slightly. "Sure, I can brief him on our standard procedures, rotating detail, perimeter checks, and event security. We've worked with third-party firms for large gatherings." He paused, looking Jacob up and down. "We've handled things pretty well so far." Jacob picked up on the defensive edge in Nate's tone. Stepping in carefully, he replied, "I'm not here to undermine your system. I just want to enhance it, if possible. I'll rely on your team's experience." Nate gave a grudging nod, though he didn't exactly smile. Meanwhile, Lucinda sipped her sparkling water and studied Jacob. "We need to ensure the media doesn't latch onto the idea that Amanda is panicking. Hiring extra security might spark rumors. We should keep this discreet." Amanda turned to Jacob. "Which is why you won't wear a standard uniform. We'll keep you low profile. For official events, you'll blend into the background as part of my entourage, but you'll be free to move as you see fit." Jacob's mind flicked back to his days in undercover operations. "Understood. I prefer it that way." A catered dinner was laid out on a long table nearby. Amanda signaled for everyone to relax, and the small gathering moved to pick at the offered dishes. Jacob stuck to coffee, feeling an undercurrent of tension. He sensed Nate's protective stance, Karen's friendly concern, and Amanda's purposeful calm. This was a different environment than he'd ever experienced, a mix of opulence and guardedness. Soon, as the meal wound down, the group dispersed. Amanda walked Jacob out to the foyer, her heels echoing on the marble. The faint scent of jasmine from the courtyard breezed through an open window. "I'm aware this is a big shift for you," she said, her tone carrying genuine empathy. "Thank you for stepping into this role." Jacob glanced at the polished floor, then met her gaze. "You took a chance on me too. I guess we both have a lot riding on this." Amanda gave a small nod of understanding. They exchanged a lingering look, one that hinted at a growing trust, or at least a mutual recognition of the stakes. As he left the mansion, Jacob couldn't help but feel he was leaving behind more than just a job. He was leaving the safety of obscurity for an arena where every move might count, and every mistake could have dire consequences. Jacob's first official day on the job began before sunrise. Dressed in plain clothes, dark slacks, a fitted shirt and a sport jacket, he arrived at Amanda's mansion to find it bustling with early activity. Catering trucks were pulling up, staff were hurrying in and out, and the courtyard fountain shimmered under strategically placed spotlights. Apparently, Amanda had a breakfast meeting with influential members of the legal community, along with a few potential donors to a philanthropic project. Karen met him at the foyer, quickly filling him in. "It's a private gathering, about 20 people. Amanda wants you to blend in, but keep an eye on everything, especially at the entrance and in the main hall. We've had issues with uninvited press sneaking in, hoping for a scoop." Jacob took a quick tour of the area, noting exit routes, observing camera placements, and mentally cataloging potential blind spots. The mansion felt like an entirely different world compared to the quiet offices he used to patrol. Here, power brokers and socialites moved in seamless circles of conversation, each handshake and greeting loaded with unstated intentions. Dressed in a crisp ivory blazer, Amanda spoke with a group of 4 attendees near a grand marble staircase. Her demeanor was gracious, her laugh measured. But Jacob, watching from a polite distance, caught the fleeting moments of tension in her eyes. The presence of so many guests in her personal space clearly put her on edge. Nate Thompson, also in plain clothes, hovered by the buffet. He offered Jacob a brief nod, but didn't approach, still appearing somewhat wary of the newcomer. Meanwhile, Karen circulated through the rooms, ensuring the event proceeded smoothly. After about an hour, Jacob noticed a tall man with silver hair loitering near the side exit that led to a private garden. His fidgety behavior caught Jacob's attention. The man seemed to be avoiding direct interaction with the other guests, glancing repeatedly at a door marked private. Jacob made his way closer, trying to appear casual. "Beautiful home, isn't it?" Jacob remarked, stepping beside him. The silver-haired man started slightly, then gave a quick smile. "Yes, absolutely stunning," he said. "I'm just trying to find the, restroom." He gestured vaguely, avoiding eye contact. Jacob returned his smile, equally polite. "They're near the main hall, actually. I can show you." "No need," the man said hurriedly, stepping away toward the door labeled private. He reached for the handle. Jacob gently placed a hand on the man's arm. "That's off limits. Let me guide you back so you don't get lost." Their eyes locked. For a split second, Jacob saw a glimmer of something akin to annoyance or even fear. Then the man forced a laugh. "Oh, sorry, must have gotten turned around." Jacob escorted him down the corridor, never relinquishing the subtle vigilance that accompanied years of law enforcement experience. As they neared the public restroom, the man slipped inside without another word. Jacob lingered for a moment, deciding to wait. After a few minutes, the man emerged, avoiding Jacob's gaze entirely as he beelined for the exit. Jacob made a mental note of the man's face and approximate age, mid-50s, aristocratic bearing, and decided to mention it to Amanda later. When the breakfast event concluded, the last guests trickled out amid polite farewells. Amanda, visibly relieved, thanked her staff in the hallway. Jacob approached quietly. "Everything went smoothly," he said. "Although there was one guy who seemed too curious about that private door. He might have just been nosy, but I'd be cautious." Amanda nodded, her expression darkening slightly. "You recall his name?" "No, he never introduced himself." Jacob paused. "But I can describe him in detail if that helps." She rubbed her temples, then offered a tight smile. "Yes, please give Karen the information. She keeps an updated log of potential threats or suspicious visitors." Jacob nodded, noticing the subtle weariness in Amanda's posture. "You okay?" "Just tired. Hosting these events is always a gamble. I have to maintain a certain public presence, but it leaves me feeling exposed." She exhaled, then added quietly, "Thank you for intervening." Jacob shrugged. "Just doing the job." Karen approached them, holding a sleek tablet. "Amanda, your next meeting is in 30 minutes. Just a quick briefing with Paul Sampson, our private investigator." Jacob remembered the name from his earlier review of Amanda's core team. Paul was the one who handled deeper investigative work. Amanda glanced at her watch, grimacing. "Right, let's do it in the study." They moved as a group, weaving through staff who were dismantling the remnants of the breakfast. Jacob noticed the skillful way Karen managed details, ensuring Amanda had minimal distractions. He also noted Amanda's polite but commanding presence, an aura of professionalism that set the tone for everyone around her. In the study, a slender man in his mid-40s waited by the desk, He had short brown hair and sharp, attentive eyes. Amanda introduced him to Jacob. "Paul, this is Jacob Miller. He's joined my personal security detail." "Jacob, Paul Sampson is an independent investigator who helps me gather evidence for some of my more delicate cases." Paul offered a firm handshake. "Nice to meet you. I've heard Amanda mention you. That alley incident was quite something." Jacob shrugged modestly. "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time." The conversation turned to the details of an ongoing case, and Jacob listened carefully, gleaning bits and pieces about the political figures Amanda was up against. Though he didn't catch every nuance, he heard enough to sense the stakes were indeed high. Standing there in a room filled with toppling stacks of legal documents and an air of quiet urgency, Jacob realized he was now fully submerged in Amanda Collins's world. Gone were the days of drifting aimlessly. He might have felt out of place in this realm of wealthy clients and powerful foes, but an undercurrent of conviction settled over him. It was too late to retreat to the safer life he had known. One thing was clear: the fight ahead would demand every skill he possessed, and perhaps more than he thought he could give. Jacob's days began to follow a new rhythm. He arrived early each morning, reviewing any fresh intelligence that Paul or Karen had gathered overnight. Then he would run perimeter checks, assess camera feeds, and occasionally drive with Amanda to her office, scanning for tails or suspicious vehicles. The role was demanding, a far cry from his solitary night shift routine. One afternoon, he joined Amanda at her downtown law firm, a gleaming skyscraper set in the heart of L.A. The building boasted high-tech security systems and an immaculate lobby of polished stone. Yet to Jacob, its large glass panels and open design seemed both a symbol of prestige and a potential vulnerability. Riding the elevator to the upper floors, Amanda stood beside him, reviewing notes on her tablet. She paused and glanced at Jacob's reflection in the elevator doors. "You're quieter than usual today," she observed. "Everything all right?" He hesitated, unsure if he should voice his concerns. "This place is beautiful, but it's also open. Too many vantage points. If someone wanted to cause trouble, there are multiple access routes to consider." Amanda sighed. "That's corporate life for you. Big show, but not always practical. If you have suggestions on improvements, let me know. I can talk to the management here." Jacob felt a wave of relief that she was open to his perspective. "I will. I just want to keep you safe." They reached her firm's floor, stepping into a sleek lobby with modern art and minimalist furniture. Staff recognized Amanda immediately and greeted her with respectful nods. Jacob hung back slightly, scanning the area out of habit. He spotted Paul by the reception desk, sipping coffee and chatting with one of the legal assistants. Paul waved them over. "Got some interesting updates?" Paul said in a low voice, handing Amanda a sealed envelope. "You might want to take a look before the briefing." Amanda arched an eyebrow, motioning for Jacob and Paul to follow her into a nearby conference room. It was spacious but functional, a long table surrounded by high-backed chairs, a large window revealing a panoramic view of the city. With the door closed, Amanda slid open the envelope's contents, a handful of photographs and typed notes. She skimmed them, her expression growing grim. "Where did you get these?" "Anonymous drop," Paul replied. "Looks like evidence suggesting the city council member you're investigating has ties to a known crime syndicate. But here's the kicker. They also have a photograph of you, presumably to warn you off. It was taken from a distance. Makes me think they've been watching you for a while." Jacob stepped forward. "That's disturbing. Do we know who took these or how?" Paul shook his head. "Not yet, but it points to a network that's bigger and better organized than we initially thought. They're clearly willing to intimidate." Amanda leaned her hands on the table, staring at the images as if they might reveal deeper truths. "The deeper I dig, the more I realize how high this goes. We've got city officials, private investors, maybe even law enforcement in their pocket. Jacob and Paul exchanged concerned looks. This was precisely the kind of entrenched corruption that made typical security measures feel insufficient. Jacob clenched his fists, recalling the times he'd run into bureaucratic stone walls as a detective. Amanda finally straightened. "All right, let's stay focused. We'll continue gathering evidence. Paul, see if you can trace these photos. Jacob, I need you to amp up surveillance when I move around the city. If they're following me, I want to know how." She glanced at the clock, then gathered the photos. "I've got a meeting in 20 minutes. Keep me posted if anything else surfaces." As she departed, Paul offered Jacob a wry grin. "Welcome to the big leagues." Jacob shrugged. "I've played a few major games before, none quite like this one, though." Paul nodded, glancing over the typed notes again. "Just don't underestimate these people. They've probably got resources we can't see yet." Jacob understood. Having spent years on the force, he knew how easily criminals with money could hide their tracks and manipulate officials. But he also felt a flicker of determination. He had once left behind a life of service because he blamed himself for a partner's death. Now he saw a chance to right past wrongs by stepping up to protect someone threatened by the very corruption he had fought against. Before leaving the conference room, Jacob took a moment to study the city skyline through the glass. LA looked bright and sprawling, a patchwork of opportunity and danger. He reflected on the changes in his own life since that first encounter with Amanda. His role now was more complicated than carrying a badge, but in some ways it felt more direct, more personal. He realized he was no longer searching for purpose. It had found him. The day Amanda introduced Jacob to a few of her closest confidants proved revealing. After an intense morning of legal prep, she invited Jacob to join her for lunch at a rooftop cafe downtown. He expected a private conversation, but upon arrival, he found Karen Reed and Paul Sampson already seated at a table with a breathtaking view of the skyline. "Hope you don't mind," Amanda said to Jacob as they approached. "I figured we could use a moment to talk strategy together. And maybe catch our breath for a minute." Karen wore a gentle smile, though she kept her phone on the table, occasionally checking for messages. Paul sipped on iced tea, sunglasses perched atop his head. They greeted Jacob warmly, and he settled into the chair Amanda pulled out for him. The waitress came by, and they placed orders: club sandwiches, salads, and cold drinks. Once she left, Amanda leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I've asked you here so we can establish a stronger network of communication among us. We need to trust each other if we're going to tackle what's coming." Paul nodded, crossing his arms. "Agreed. We're dealing with a potential conspiracy that spans multiple sectors. Information has become our lifeline." Karen brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. "Also, the media attention on Amanda is only going to grow. I'm doing my best to keep the tabloids at bay, but they sense something big is happening." Jacob observed them, appreciating the seriousness of their commitment. He realized that Amanda had carefully assembled a team she could trust, people who, despite different skill sets, shared a common sense of loyalty. "So where do I fit in?" he asked, taking a sip of water. Amanda exchanged a glance with Karen. "We want you to feel comfortable voicing any security concerns, or even moral concerns, Jacob. If you see something that feels off, say it, regardless of whether it's about the legal side, the PR approach, or even the people we're working with." Karen chimed in. "We don't want you to hold back just because you're new. Amanda believes in your instincts, and so do I." "We need to cover all angles." Jacob nodded, feeling a subtle warmth at being regarded so highly, especially after years of self-doubt. The memory of Randall's death surfaced momentarily, but he pushed it aside, reminding himself that he had come a long way since then. Their lunch arrived, and for a few minutes the conversation turned casual, discussing favorite coffee shops and weekend plans. Paul revealed that he used to be a journalist before switching to private investigations, a background that explained his knack for piecing together a story from scattered clues. Karen admitted she once dreamed of becoming a novelist, but ended up in administrative work due to family obligations. Eventually, the topic circled back to business. Paul placed a small spiral notebook on the table. "I've been gathering intel on the men who cornered Amanda that night. Nothing definitive, but rumor suggests they might be connected to a private security firm known for doing dirty work off the record." Amanda set down her fork, tensing. "A private firm, so someone hired them to intimidate me?" "Likely," Paul replied. "They're known for handling unofficial tasks. They wouldn't have a clear public record, so proving a link to your case will be tough." Jacob clenched his jaw. "What about the police? Are we sharing this information with them?" A hesitant glance passed among them. Amanda answered carefully, "I have contacts within the LAPD, but I don't trust all of them. Some might be compromised. We can't risk leaks right now, not when the stakes are this high." Karen placed a reassuring hand on Jacob's arm. "That's why we need you more than ever. Someone with actual police experience who still has a moral compass." "We'd like you to help Paul dig deeper," quietly. Jacob hesitated, recalling his conversation with Miguel. He didn't want to cross any lines that would jeopardize his friend or put him at odds with the department, but he understood the danger in trusting the wrong people. "Okay," he said, looking at Amanda. "I can reach out discreetly to 1 or 2 officers I know are solid, but no more. And only if you're comfortable with it." She nodded, gratitude flickering in her eyes. "Thank you, Jacob." Just then, the waitress returned to clear plates and refilled drinks. For a brief moment, the 4 of them fell silent, acknowledging the weight of what lay ahead. Karen eventually broke the silence, her tone calmer. "On a lighter note, we can't ignore the human side of this. Amanda, you haven't taken a real break in months. We might all need some downtime before the pressure ramps up further." Amanda offered a faint smile. "After everything is settled, maybe then I'll sleep." Paul chuckled. "I'll believe that when I see it." Jacob listened, reflecting on how each of them was juggling personal sacrifices in pursuit of a cause bigger than themselves. He realized this wasn't just a job for any of them. It was a mission. And in that moment, amid the hum of traffic below and the sweltering sunshine above, he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced since leaving the force. Night had fallen over Los Angeles by the time Amanda's next public appearance rolled around, a charity gala organized by a non-profit supporting underprivileged youth. Jacob had spent the afternoon coordinating with Nate Thompson and the security team, devising a plan to keep Amanda safe. The event, held at a downtown ballroom, promised a swanky crowd of donors, celebrities, and politicians. Wearing a tailored black suit, Jacob accompanied Amanda up the marble steps at the venue's entrance. Photographers and reporters lined the walkway, flashes illuminating them in staccato bursts. Lucinda Marquez was there, orchestrating subtle directions. A wave here, a brief stop for a photo there. Amanda handled it with practiced poise, though Jacob could sense her underlying apprehension. They entered a lavish foyer with an ornate chandelier, where waiters offered champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Nate led 2 guards to scan the perimeters, while Jacob stayed close to Amanda's side. It was a careful dance. They needed to appear relaxed, but Jacob remained alert, his gaze sweeping the crowd for any sign of trouble. Soon, Amanda was approached by Councilman Bradley James, a well-known figure in local politics. He offered a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Amanda, always a pleasure," he said smoothly, shaking her hand. Then his gaze flicked to Jacob. "And you are Jacob Miller," Jacob replied, keeping his tone neutral. He recognized the name Bradley James from Amanda's files, someone with close ties to city officials, possibly with a foot in both legitimate and shadier dealings. "Amanda's new security," she said matter-of-factly, then promptly changed the subject. "How's the council holding up these days, Bradley? Heard there's some turbulence around the budget proposals." Councilman James waved a dismissive hand. "Politics is always turbulent, my dear. But the city's best interests remain our priority." He paused, letting his gaze drift between Amanda and Jacob. "I was sorry to hear about the threats you've been receiving. The city council hates to see one of our top attorneys feeling unsafe." Amanda's smile was polite. "I appreciate the concern." Jacob could almost taste the tension between them. He wondered if the councilman's statement was genuine or if it carried a veiled message. Amanda ended the interaction smoothly, guiding Jacob away. A few minutes later, as they moved deeper into the ballroom, a cluster of journalists pressed in, cameras flashing. Lucinda appeared, gently diverting them, but one reporter managed to push close. "Amanda, any comments on the rumor you're investigating City Hall corruption?" the reporter asked, voice strident. "Are you aware that some officials are calling you reckless?" Amanda maintained a calm demeanor. "No comment at this time. Enjoy the gala, folks." She moved on, Jacob close behind. They reached a quieter corridor near the back of the ballroom, where the noise dulled to a steady hum. Jacob spotted Karen by a side door, scanning a roster. Amanda signaled for a brief break, stepping aside to gather her thoughts. "That was intense," Karen muttered. "Media's circling like vultures." Amanda smoothed her hair, standing tall. "They sense a scandal. One big scoop could launch a career. I just wish they'd focus on the cause we're here to support tonight." Suddenly, Jacob felt his phone vibrate. A text from Nate. "Suspicious individual near backstage exit. Might be armed." Jacob turned to Amanda and Karen, voice low. "I need to check something. Stay close to Karen, all right?" Amanda nodded, her eyes reflecting a flicker of worry. "Be careful." Jacob wove through the crowd, navigating the plush corridors until he reached the backstage area. There, he found Nate speaking in hushed tones with one of the guards, who gestured toward a dim hallway. "He's down there," the guard whispered. "Claims he's staff, but I don't recognize him. He's wearing a jacket that could conceal a weapon." Jacob nodded, stepping quietly down the hall. The area was lined with boxes of stage equipment, and the overhead lighting was weak. He spotted a figure rummaging through a trunk. If the man was staff, he seemed oddly out of place, his posture tense. Jacob approached cautiously. "Excuse me, this is a restricted area." The man turned, eyes wide with surprise. He wore an ID badge that looked a bit too clean, almost like it was freshly printed. Jacob noticed the outline of something bulky beneath the man's jacket. "A camera or a firearm?" "Sorry, pal," the man said, raising his hands. "I'm just looking for a power cord for the AV setup. We're short on supplies." Jacob stepped closer, maintaining a calm demeanor. "Mind if I see your ID?" The man hesitated, a flicker of defiance crossing his face. "Sure," he said slowly, reaching for the badge. In one swift motion, he pivoted, trying to bolt past Jacob. Jacob lunged, intercepting him. They grappled briefly. The man shoved Jacob into a stack of boxes, which tumbled over with a loud crash. Alarms rose in Jacob's mind. This wasn't typical staff behavior. Summoning his police instincts, he managed to pin the man's arm behind his back. Nate and the guard rushed down the hall. The suspect squirmed, cursing loudly. When Nate ripped open the man's jacket, a small handgun tumbled to the floor, clattering against the concrete. Jacob's pulse thundered in his ears. Nate barked instructions. confiscating the weapon. In the distance, music played faintly in the ballroom, the party continuing blissfully unaware of the danger backstage. As the guard radioed for police, Jacob secured the man's wrists with zip ties. The suspect glared up at him, silent hatred in his eyes. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that this incident was tied to Amanda's situation. Why else would someone sneak into an event she was attending, armed and lurking near the exit? He looked down at the subdued intruder, a knot of tension coiling in his stomach. If Amanda really was caught in a conspiracy far larger than either of them had imagined, this might be only the beginning. It was well after midnight when the police finally led the armed intruder away in handcuffs. The charity gala continued inside the ballroom, blissfully unaware of the near disaster that had unfolded backstage. Jacob stood off to one side, speaking quietly with Nate Thompson as the blue and red flashes from the squad car lights painted the corridor in shifting color. "We'll see if this guy actually talks," Nate muttered, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "But I doubt it. He seems more like a hired operative than a random troublemaker." Jacob nodded in agreement. "I've dealt with that type before. They know how to keep their mouths shut." Once the suspect was gone, Jacob and Nate returned to the foyer. Amanda stood with Karen near the exit, her posture rigid but her face composed. Seeing Jacob approach, she waved him over. "What happened back there?" Amanda asked quietly, trying not to draw attention from the straggling guests who lingered by the coat check. "Guy was armed. He claimed to be staff, but obviously that wasn't true," Jacob explained, keeping his voice calm. "We managed to detain him, and the police took him in. We'll see if he reveals anything." Amanda inhaled sharply, her hands tightening around her small evening clutch. "I'm grateful you caught him before anything worse happened. This was supposed to be a night about helping kids, and now we have another reminder that someone wants me out of the picture." Karen touched Amanda's arm, a gesture of reassurance. "Let's get you home. The press is already packing up outside, and I'd rather not give them any more fodder for speculation." Amanda agreed, and they left soon after, skipping the standard round of farewells. Jacob drove Amanda back in her sleek black sedan, while Nate and Karen followed behind in another vehicle. The streets of L.A. were mostly empty, neon lights reflecting off the shiny pavement. Amanda gazed through the window, her face pensive. "You're quiet," Jacob remarked gently, keeping his focus on the road. Amanda sighed. "I'm just thinking about how relentless this is becoming. When it was just threats and phone calls, I could handle it. Now armed men are showing up where I work and where I socialize." Jacob's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "It's hard to say how far they'll push. But we'll be ready." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I appreciate your confidence, but I can't help feeling we're missing something big. If they have money for hired guns, it means there are larger interests at play." Jacob pressed his lips together, not wanting to sugarcoat the danger. "We'll keep digging. Paul's investigating the private security angle, and I've got a few inquiries out to people I trust. We'll find out who's behind this." When they reached the mansion, the gate guards waved them in. Karen and Nate arrived moments later. Before heading inside, Amanda paused at the steps leading to the front door, turning to Jacob and the others. "I know it's late, but I'd like us all to meet in the morning. I want to strategize our next moves from both a legal and security standpoint." Her gaze swept across them. "We can't stay reactive. We need to be proactive." Everyone agreed. As Amanda and Karen disappeared into the house, Jacob lingered a moment near the driveway with Nate. The tension between them had eased slightly after tonight's incident. "You did good work," Nate said gruffly, hands resting on his hips. "I know I wasn't exactly thrilled when Amanda brought you on, but you've proven you can handle yourself." Jacob appreciated the honest acknowledgement. "Thanks. I don't want to step on your toes, Nate, but I believe we can work well together." Nate shrugged, though there was a flicker of acceptance in his eyes. One day at a time, now get some rest. Jacob made his way to his own car, replaying the evening's events in his mind. What troubled him most was the possibility that the man with the gun was merely a pawn. If that was the case, they might soon face more sophisticated attempts to remove Amanda from her legal battles. The risk was real, and it was growing. Back at his apartment, Jacob tossed his jacket over a chair and collapsed onto the couch. Though his body craved sleep, his mind refused to cooperate. He picked up his phone, debating whether to call Miguel to see if the police had booked the intruder under a known alias. At nearly 3 in the morning, it felt pointless. He decided to try to rest instead. Closing his eyes, he reflected on the sense of purpose he had found in protecting Amanda. It gave him something tangible to fight for, a reason to use the instincts he had spent a lifetime honing. Yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the fear that if they failed, the consequences could be life-threatening, not just for Amanda, but for everyone who had chosen to stand beside her. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Amanda's mansion the following morning, illuminating the polished floors and casting delicate shadows along the walls. Jacob arrived early for the strategy session, determined to leave no stone unturned. Despite the fatigue from the previous night's incident, a shot of adrenaline coursed through him whenever he thought about the menacing forces lurking in the background. He found Karen in the kitchen, sipping coffee while finalizing some notes on a tablet. She offered him a smile and a fresh mug. "We're meeting in the study in about 10 minutes. Amanda's just wrapping up a call with her investigator." Jacob nodded, gratefully accepting the coffee. "Thanks. You look surprisingly awake after last night." Karen shrugged with a rueful grin. "Caffeine helps, that, and I've gotten used to crisis mode. Working for Amanda is never dull." They headed to the study together, passing a few household staff who were discreetly tidying the hallway. Inside, Amanda sat at her large wooden desk, a laptop open before her, and a neat stack of case files to one side. Paul Sampson stood by the bookshelf, scanning a document. Nate, arms folded, leaned against the mantel of a small fireplace, his expression guarded. "Morning, everyone," Amanda said, gesturing for them to gather around. "Let's start with last night's incident. Any updates on the suspect?" Paul set down his paper. "He's in custody, but he's refusing to talk. No surprise there. The preliminary background check shows a fake name, and the ID badge was counterfeit. Whoever hired him covered their tracks well." Amanda exhaled. "We'll need to keep digging. Meanwhile, I've got a meeting with one of my clients this afternoon. They're nervous about the corruption case, given the threats. Jacob, you'll come with me." Jacob inclined his head. "Of course," Karen cleared her throat. "We also need to manage the media. Lucinda's been trying to keep the story under wraps, but some bloggers are already running pieces about an armed intruder at the charity gala. Sooner or later, the rumor mill might connect it to Amanda." Nate rolled his shoulders. "We can't hide everything. Might be best to show a strong front, acknowledge the attempt, emphasize that your team handled it." Amanda pursed her lips, torn between protecting her privacy and the reality of public scrutiny. "I'll let Lucinda guide the official line, but all this press attention makes me an even bigger target. I'm sure that's exactly what they want." Jacob studied the tension in her face. "We won't let them intimidate you, but if the press is sniffing around, we have to assume more serious attempts could follow." Amanda nodded. "Agreed, which brings me to another issue. The moral line we're all walking here. I want every measure to protect me and my team, but I refuse to stoop to unethical actions. I've built my career on respecting the law." She cast a meaningful glance at Jacob, who understood her concern. He'd already considered the possibility of having to bend certain rules to safeguard her. "I get it," he said. "No illegal shortcuts." For a moment, the room was silent. Each of them recognized the growing complexity of defending Amanda without crossing boundaries that could jeopardize her career or integrity. Paul eventually broke the tension. "I'll continue investigating this private security firm. We have some leads on who might be funding them, but it's a delicate web. If they're connected to certain politicians or business magnates, we need tangible proof." Karen checked her tablet. "Amanda, your next call is in 15 minutes. Should I reschedule?" Amanda glanced at the clock on the wall. "No, I'll take it. That client's anxious enough as it is. Let's wrap up here. We'll regroup later this evening." As Paul, Karen, and Nate filtered out, Jacob lingered behind. Amanda closed her laptop, letting out a quiet sigh. "You'd think after all these years in criminal law, I'd be used to tension. But it's personal in a way that catches me off guard sometimes." Jacob approached her desk, noting the faint circles under her eyes. "Because it's not just professional threats. They're targeting you personally, hoping fear will make you drop the case." Amanda's gaze rested on him. "Yes, and it makes me wonder, how far will they go?" Jacob didn't have an easy answer. "I wish I knew," he admitted. "All I can promise is I'll do everything I can to protect you and find out who's behind it," she offered a grateful smile. "Thank you. That means more than you know." For a split second, Jacob sensed an unspoken bond between them. But he pushed aside any personal feelings that threatened to blur his focus. They had a job to do, and letting emotion cloud it could be dangerous for them both. Jacob drove Amanda to her downtown meeting later that afternoon. The location, a nondescript office building, housed one of Amanda's longtime clients who had been under scrutiny due to the wider corruption investigations. Given the atmosphere of looming danger, Jacob coordinated with Nate to ensure there were backup measures in place, a second car stationed nearby, an emergency exit route mapped out. Upon arrival, Jacob scanned the lobby, eyes sweeping across the security desk, the cameras, and the quiet hum of people walking to and from elevators. Satisfied, he escorted Amanda to the 14th floor, where the client's office suite was located. The receptionist waved them through, and soon Amanda disappeared into a glass-walled conference room with her client, leaving Jacob outside in a waiting area. Almost immediately, Jacob's phone vibrated. Miguel's number appeared on the screen. Stepping away, he answered in a low voice. "Hey, man, got something for me?" Miguel sounded tense. "I pulled a few strings and looked into the guy you apprehended. He's ex-military with no official criminal record, likely worked contract jobs overseas. I can't say more over the phone, but I'd be careful. This points to higher-level orchestration." Jacob felt his stomach knot. "Thanks for the warning. Yeah, just watch your back," Miguel said, then hung up. Jacob pocketed his phone, mind racing. If these threats now involved specialized mercenaries, Amanda's enemies had both money and skill. Instinctively, he checked the corridor leading to the conference room, scanning for anything amiss. A wave of unease washed over him, but everything appeared calm. 20 minutes later, a commotion erupted inside the conference room. Raised voices echoed through the glass, and Jacob quickly moved toward the door. He saw Amanda's client, an older man named Gerald Rogers, rubbing his temples, eyes wide. Amanda stood across from him, arms folded, her demeanor controlled but obviously tense. Jacob entered carefully, expression neutral, but prepared for whatever was happening. Rogers glared at him briefly, then turned to Amanda. "I'm sorry, but this is all too much. I've got a family to protect. If you're telling me these threats could escalate even further, maybe it's better if I just cut a deal and walk away." Amanda tried to calm him. "Gerald, please. We can't let intimidation dictate justice. If you back out now, everything we've built in your defense might crumble. Rogers slammed a fist on the table. I never signed up for a war. My reputation, my life, these are on the line. Seeing Rogers spiraling into panic, Jacob spoke quietly. Sir, I understand your fear, but the moment you fold, whoever's behind this intimidation wins. That's exactly what they want. Rogers shot him a weary look, then turned back to Amanda. I need time to think. I can't make decisions in this state. Without waiting for a response, he grabbed his briefcase and hurried out, leaving Amanda and Jacob alone. She let out a trembling breath, tension visible in her tight shoulders. This is what they're after, Jacob. To break my client's resolve until all my cases collapse. And if Rogers withdraws, it won't just hurt him. It'll discredit my entire investigation. Jacob glanced at the door through which Rogers had fled. He's scared. People do desperate things when they feel cornered. Amanda lifted her chin, the determined spark returning to her eyes. I can't let them win, but right now, it feels like we're on the edge of losing everything. Jacob hesitated, unsure how to comfort her. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, hoping the gesture conveyed quiet support. We won't let that happen. If we have to tighten security around Rogers or any other client, we will. We'll make them feel safe enough to keep fighting. She gave him a grateful nod, though the worry in her gaze didn't fade. I'll talk to Paul about the possibility of extra protection for certain clients. But that might stretch us too thin. They left the conference room shortly after, riding the elevator back down in silence. As they reached the lobby, Karen called Amanda's cell with more unsettling news. Rumors were swirling in the press, suggesting that Amanda's star witness in another corruption case was being pressured to recant testimony. Amanda groaned, and Jacob watched the flicker of fatigue in her eyes. The storm seemed to be growing, pressing from every angle at once. He could tell she was fighting to keep composure, but the relentless pressure was undeniable. On the drive back to the mansion, she finally voiced what was on her mind. Jacob, if all my clients and witnesses become too terrified to speak, the entire case collapses. And if the case collapses, the people who orchestrated all this corruption remain untouchable. Jacob tightened his hands on the steering wheel. We need a big breakthrough, something to prove you're still standing strong, or evidence that ties these threats directly to your opponents. Amanda nodded, staring out the window as the afternoon sun glinted off skyscrapers. I'm just not sure we can get that breakthrough before they bring us down. Every path seems blocked, every friend or ally uncertain. A lump formed in Jacob's throat, for he too sensed the weight of their predicament. They were straining against a seemingly insurmountable foe, one that used fear as its weapon of choice. He could only hope that in their darkest moments, the loyalty and grit shared among Amanda's team would propel them forward, if they could avoid being overwhelmed first. Night fell quickly, blanketing Los Angeles in a quiet hush. Back at the Collins residence, the core team gathered in Amanda's spacious study. Karen had laid out multiple files on the conference table, while Paul stood near a digital whiteboard, scribbling names and potential connections in marker. Nate leaned against the wall, arms crossed, taking it all in. Jacob took a seat beside Amanda, ready to tackle the evening's planning session. Amanda tapped a printed page. Paul, you mentioned a lead on the private security firm that hired the man from the gala, something about a shell corporation in Nevada. Paul nodded, flipping through his notes. Yes, the firm's official name is Arvasec Solutions. They have a minimal online presence. Their listed address is basically a mailbox. The real owners hide behind layers of paperwork. But I've managed to link them to a man named Baxter Wilson, who happens to be an influential lobbyist in Sacramento. Karen let out a low whistle. Lobbyists are well positioned to pull strings without drawing attention. That might explain how they're getting around so easily. Jacob leaned forward. If Baxter Wilson is funneling money to hire mercenaries, we need tangible proof. Otherwise, it's just speculation. Paul tapped the board. I've discovered a pattern of suspicious payments, large sums moving between various accounts. I'm working on obtaining bank statements that could tie Baxter's finances to Arvasek, but it might take time. Amanda scanned the room, frustration etched on her features. Time isn't our friend. My clients are panicking, and each day we spend chasing leads is another day the other side can strike again. Nate cleared his throat. We could consider more proactive measures. Surveillance, infiltration, something that puts us on the offensive. Jacob felt a flicker of caution. That sounds risky. If we cross a line, we risk compromising Amanda's ethics and possibly the legality of our operations. Nate shrugged. Then we keep it within the bounds of the law, but we don't stay passive. We can monitor known associates of Baxter Wilson, track their movements. If they slip up, we catch it. Amanda pressed her fingers to her temple, looking at Jacob. Is that feasible without endangering anyone? Jacob thought it through. We'd have to do it carefully, maybe in partnership with a trusted source in law enforcement. But it's better than waiting for the next ambush. Paul nodded, making a note. I can help coordinate that. Just be aware that we need evidence that stands up in court. Otherwise, it's worthless. The discussion continued for another hour, covering everything from potential new safe houses for Amanda's clients to possible legal maneuvers that might shield them from intimidation. By the time the meeting ended, the group was exhausted, yet a sense of fragile hope permeated the air. They had a plan, albeit a tentative one. Later that night, Jacob stepped out onto the mansion's rear patio, drawn by the cool breeze that rustled the tall hedges. The city lights glowed in the distance, a sprawling constellation against the blackness. He almost didn't notice Amanda until she emerged from the shadows near the edge of the terrace, her arms folded. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly, stopping a few steps away. She gave a wry smile. "No, you." He shook his head. Too many thoughts racing around. Amanda exhaled, her breath visible in the cooler night air. "Every time I think we've got a handle on this, the situation twists. Part of me worries we're running out of time." Jacob stepped closer, the soft light from inside the house casting a gentle glow on Amanda's face. "We made progress tonight, though. We have leads on Baxter Wilson, and we're reinforcing security for you and your clients." She turned to him fully, voice low. "Jacob, I trust you. I want you to know that you've proven you care about my safety and about doing this the right way." Warmth spread through him at her words, but he kept his tone steady. "You can count on me. I won't let them wear you down." She offered a small, grateful nod. "I know. Still, I feel this weight on my shoulders, like everything could crumble if I make the wrong move." Jacob hesitated, tempted to reach out. His mind flashed to the lingering question of whether their mutual respect and shared moments of vulnerability had begun to cross professional lines. But he reminded himself that this was not the time to complicate matters with personal feelings. Instead, he gestured to the city skyline. "You've faced big challenges before, and you're not alone. You've got Karen, Paul, Nate, and me." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "I appreciate that." "More than I can say." They stood there in companionable silence, the hush of the night offering a rare moment of calm. Finally, Amanda stepped back, glancing toward the patio doors. "We should try to rest. Tomorrow could be another battle." Jacob agreed. As he watched her walk away, he recognized the determination that held her upright, even under immense pressure. He admired it, perhaps more deeply than he cared to admit. Shaking off the thought, he reminded himself that morning would bring fresh challenges, and he needed to be ready. Days slipped by in a blur of heightened security measures and investigative breakthroughs. Jacob coordinated daily briefings with Nate, carefully assigning guard shifts for Amanda's office trips, public appearances, and even her casual outings. Meanwhile, Paul forged ahead with research on Baxter Wilson, and Karen juggled logistics to ensure Amanda's schedule ran smoothly despite the chaos swirling around them. During one of these briefings, Nate announced some unsettling news. "We've spotted a vehicle trailing Amanda's car multiple times this week. Different drivers, same model, dark SUV with tinted windows. Each time we try to get closer, they peel away." Amanda frowned. Could be private surveillance, or maybe a reporter fishing for a headline. Or, Jacob offered grimly, it's someone connected to Arvasek or Baxter Wilson. They're gathering intel on your routines, Paul chimed in. "I've been cross-checking the license plates we managed to record. They're all rentals, which makes tracing them a dead end." Sighing, Amanda leaned back in her chair. "So they're methodical. I should assume they're building a detailed picture of my habits to strike when they see an opening." Jacob caught the subtle quake in her voice, but she quickly masked it with her usual composure. "We'll keep adjusting your routes," he said, "and swap cars if needed. They won't get an easy shot at you." As the week drew to a close, the team received a call from one of Amanda's high-profile clients, Michelle Hayes, who had uncovered potentially explosive documents tying a local real estate mogul to illegal campaign contributions. Immediately, Amanda set a meeting to review the material and strategize how to integrate it into her broader corruption case. Jacob insisted on robust security for Michelle, anticipating that if these documents were as big as rumored, the conspirators would act swiftly to silence her. In the days leading up to the meeting, the tension among the team soared. Michelle confided in Amanda that anonymous calls had begun ringing her personal cell phone, suggesting she stay quiet if she valued her life. Karen got frantic texts from other witnesses, shaken by rumors that a new wave of intimidation tactics was ramping up. Paul doubled his efforts on infiltration, trying to pin down the networks behind Arvasek. Nate and his guards stepped up patrols around the mansion, even scouring the perimeter at odd hours. Jacob found himself working 14-hour days, sleeping in short bursts on a small cot set up in a spare room near Amanda's office. Each morning, he'd wake stiff and groggy, but the moment he remembered the gravity of their situation, adrenaline kicked in. He reminded himself this was why he took the job, to be in the thick of it, protecting someone who had become more than just a client. Finally, the day of Michelle's meeting arrived. The plan was to convene at a secure location, a lawyer's conference center with restricted entry, discreet staff, and minimal foot traffic. Jacob personally checked the site beforehand, verifying security cameras and the layout of exits. When Amanda and Michelle arrived, they were ushered into a windowless meeting room. Jacob stood guard in the hall alongside Nate, while Paul and Karen joined the discussion to go over the documents. Almost an hour into the meeting, Jacob sensed a disturbance, tense voices carrying through the door. He carefully opened it a crack, spotting Michelle weeping, face pale. Amanda tried to console her while Karen handed the client tissues. "I'm sorry," Michelle sobbed, "but after everything that's happened, I'm terrified of the consequences. If I turn these files over, my name will be public and my family might be in danger." Amanda set a reassuring hand on Michelle's shoulder. "We can request protective measures. I'll see if the district attorney's office can offer something." Michelle shook her head. "You don't know these people. They're ruthless, and there are rumors that some officers are on their payroll. I can't go through with it." A heavy silence took hold. Paul discreetly glanced at Amanda, concern etched on his face. Karen offered a hushed plea. "Michelle, please don't back out now. You came this far." Jacob watched Amanda's expression harden. He recognized her resolve, the fierce determination she summoned in moments like this, but he also sensed the fear that threatened to undermine everything. Nate hovered near the corner, fists clenched. He mouthed at Jacob, "We're losing her." Jacob nodded grimly. If Michelle withdrew, the vital evidence she possessed might stay buried forever. Another crucial pillar in Amanda's case would topple, and those orchestrating the intimidation campaign would gain the upper hand once more. Inside, Amanda inhaled deeply, then spoke in a measured tone. "Michelle, I know you're scared. We all are. But if you don't speak out, these people continue to operate in the shadows, hurting more lives. I promise we'll protect you." Jacob braced himself, half expecting Michelle to bolt from the room, but she remained, tears glistening on her cheeks. The group gathered closer, each one aware that the case's future might hinge on this moment. As Amanda continued to assure Michelle they'd find a way to keep her safe, Jacob felt the tension in the room rise to a fever pitch, a sense that they were inches away from either a breakthrough or total collapse. Jacob studied the list of names on the conference room's whiteboard, feeling an uneasy knot in his stomach. The team had gathered at Amanda's mansion in the early morning, running on too little sleep and too much coffee. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, casting geometric patterns on the polished floor. On the whiteboard, Paul had methodically mapped out every known player in the corruption network, from Baxter Wilson down to the smallest enforcers. "It's all coming to a head," Amanda said, tapping her pen against the board. Michelle finally agreed to hand over the documents, but she's still terrified. "We need to move fast." Karen, seated at a nearby desk, was rapidly typing on her laptop. "I'm finishing a secure digital backup of all the documents. Then I'll forward them to a handful of trusted reporters, people we believe aren't compromised." Paul nodded. "This way, if something happens to Michelle or the originals, the story can still go public." Nate crossed his arms, standing by the window. "And that makes Amanda a direct threat to these people. They won't just sit back while she circulates incriminating evidence." Jacob glanced at Amanda. She wore a tailored navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in a neat twist. Though her posture was firm, he could see lines of exhaustion bracketing her eyes. "What's your next move?" he asked quietly. Amanda inhaled. "I'm planning to confront a key figure. Gerald Rogers hasn't backed out entirely. He's teetering. He's agreed to a meeting with me and a couple of city officials who aren't corrupt. If we can convince him he'll have support and protection, he might publicly validate Michelle's evidence." Karen stopped typing, looking over her glasses at Amanda. "When is this meeting? Tomorrow morning?" "A neutral location, Rogers' own property in Bel Air. He wants to host it somewhere he feels in control. I need to be there, obviously, but that also means I'm stepping into a less secure environment." Jacob nodded. "We'll set a detailed plan. No one goes in or out without clearance. Nate and I will check the property in advance." Nate pushed off the window ledge. "Right. If these people want to make a move, they might choose that moment. We'll be ready." That afternoon, Jacob joined Nate for a reconnaissance trip to Rogers' estate. The winding driveway led to an expansive, gated property with carefully manicured lawns and a main house resembling a French chateau. They parked discreetly outside the gates and were met by one of Rogers' assistants who gave them a short tour. Inside, Jacob noted tall windows that allowed for multiple vantage points, both an architectural highlight and a security nightmare. He and Nate meticulously checked exits, noting which ones could be used as escape routes if something went wrong. They agreed that additional guards would be stationed at key choke points. Before leaving, they spotted Gerald Rogers himself in the courtyard, speaking with a landscaper. When he caught sight of them, he walked over, shoulders hunched in apprehension. "I appreciate you doing this," he said in a low tone, rubbing his forehead, "but I still have reservations. The threats, they've been getting worse." Jacob met Rogers's anxious gaze. "We understand your fear, sir, but if you stand with Amanda, it will show her opponents that they can't intimidate everyone." Rogers swallowed hard, nodding but saying nothing more. He retreated inside, leaving Jacob with a lingering sense of unease. The mansion felt like the stage for a high-stakes drama, one where the potential for tragedy was palpable. Back at Amanda's mansion, evening set in with a chill wind that rustled the hedges. The team reconvened in the study to finalize the plan. Karen had arranged for discreet local police support, officers she believed were still trustworthy. Paul presented a map of Rogers' property with newly marked security checkpoints, escape routes, and vantage points for potential snipers. Amanda studied the layout. "We'll arrive with minimal staff, so it doesn't look like an invasion." "But I want everyone on high alert." Nate nodded. "Understood. I'll position guards outside. Jacob will stay close to you and Rogers." Jacob glanced at Paul. "What about updates on Baxter Wilson?" Paul's face darkened. "He's been laying low. Nothing new on his accounts. Either he's preparing a counterstrike or he's waiting to see if intimidation alone will break your clients." Amanda folded her arms. "I won't let that happen. Tomorrow, with Rogers on board, we can finalize the case's framework. Then I'll release the evidence to the press. They won't be able to bury it once the media gets wind." A heavy silence followed, each of them aware that the coming day carried immense risks. Karen clutched her tablet to her chest as if it were a shield. Nate stared at the map with an air of grim determination. Amanda's gaze swept the room, lingering on Jacob, who sat quietly, projecting calm but feeling a churn of apprehension in his gut. "All right," Amanda finally said. "Get some rest if you can. Tomorrow might be the hardest day we've had yet." They dispersed, leaving Jacob alone for a moment in the study. He stared at the notes pinned to the board, photographs, printed emails, and newspaper clippings, all woven into a tapestry of corruption. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. If they failed, Amanda's career, and perhaps even her life, would be in jeopardy. Yet, in the midst of it all, he was determined not to repeat the mistakes of his past, where hesitation and a misjudgment had cost his partner everything. Running a hand through his short hair, Jacob exhaled, then headed to his temporary room, the tension coiling in his muscles. Tomorrow, everything could change, for better or for worse. Jacob awoke before dawn, the sky outside a deep blue tinged with faint gold. Though he hadn't slept well, the knot in his stomach told him it was time to face the day. He dressed in a dark suit, ensured his sidearm was secure in its concealed holster, and stepped into the quiet hallway. He found Amanda in the small breakfast nook, cradling a mug of coffee. She wore a charcoal-grey pantsuit that matched the solemnity of the morning's mission. A tired smile crossed her face as she spotted Jacob. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Too many thoughts." "You?" Amanda sipped her coffee, staring at a half-empty plate of toast. "Been up since 3. I keep thinking through every angle of how today might play out." Jacob took a seat across from her, feeling the tension in the air. "We've prepared as best we can. Nate and I checked Rogers' estate. Karen and Paul are coordinating backup. You've got me right next to you. We'll handle this." For a brief moment, her gaze softened. "I know. I trust all of you. But something about this feels like we're walking into the lion's den." Jacob wanted to offer reassurance, but he understood her instinct. People like Baxter Wilson thrived on intimidation, manipulating fear to push good people into bad choices. "If we do our jobs, you'll be safe," he said, trying to inject confidence into his tone. "We just need Gerald Rogers to stick with us." Amanda nodded, taking another slow sip. "He's key. If we can keep him from backing out, the case stays strong. If not, Everything falls apart. As sunlight finally broke over the horizon, they stood. "Let's get going," Amanda said. "I'd rather not linger." The drive to Bel Air took place in a convoy of 2 cars, Amanda and Jacob in one, Nate and Karen in the other. Paul stayed behind, ready to disseminate the evidence if all went well or if things went very wrong. Amanda stared out the window at the manicured neighborhoods, lost in thought. Jacob occasionally glanced her way, noting the tight line of her jaw. "Is there anything you want to talk about?" he finally ventured. She turned her gaze from the window, her eyes reflecting a complicated mixture of anxiety and resolve. "I was thinking about how much has changed in the past couple of weeks. I went from believing I could handle everything myself to realizing I need help. And not just professional security. I need allies." Jacob gripped the steering wheel. "That's normal. Facing something like this alone is impossible." Her features softened. "It's more than that. I used to think vulnerability was a weakness, but having all of you, Karen, Paul, Nate, and you especially, has made me see that letting people in can be a strength." Warmth spread through Jacob, but he didn't let it distract him. "I'm glad to be part of it," he said simply, pulling his attention back to the road as they approached the gates of Rogers's estate. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Several local police officers, previously vetted by Karen, stood discreetly along the driveway. Nate conferred with them, finalizing positions. Rogers appeared on the front steps, looking anxious but determined. Jacob and Amanda exited the car, scanning the area. The estate's grandeur felt overshadowed by the seriousness of the occasion. Rogers waved them toward a drawing room just off the main foyer, where a pair of city officials waited, a district attorney's representative and a respected judge known for integrity. The meeting began with formal introductions, but tension underpinned every word. The officials asked Rogers pointed questions about the documents Michelle had passed along. Amanda offered clarifications on how they fit into her broader corruption case. Outside the drawing room windows, uniformed guards patrolled the lawns. As the discussion deepened, Gerald Rogers's initial unease slowly gave way to cautious optimism. He spoke of the pain of seeing city funds siphoned off for personal gain by certain developers and council members. He admitted to once being complicit in shady dealings, but insisted he now sought redemption. Amanda seized on that. "Gerald, if you stand with us publicly, the tide could turn. You're influential enough to draw attention to these crimes, but you must be prepared for backlash." Rogers exhaled, his gaze drifting to the window where a uniformed officer strolled by. "I'm committed, but it's still terrifying." The district attorney's representative chimed in. "We can work on protective measures for you and your family if you testify." A flicker of relief passed over Rogers's face. "Then I'll do it," he said, voice trembling. "Let's make this official. I'll sign a statement, and we can schedule a press conference." Amanda gave him a grateful nod. "You're making the right choice." Jacob stood near the doorway, ever watchful. Though the meeting seemed successful, he couldn't shake a certain foreboding. The house was too silent, the air too charged with possibility. He reminded himself to stay vigilant. Whatever had driven the conspirators to hire armed operatives wouldn't simply vanish now that Rogers was cooperating. Amanda glanced over at him, as if sensing his unease. Their eyes met for a moment. Neither spoke, but the shared look acknowledged the enormous risk they were taking. They both knew the confrontation with their unseen enemies was reaching a critical point, and they could only hope that their preparations would hold strong when the inevitable blow landed. Despite the heightened security, the meeting at Rogers's estate concluded without incident. The officials departed with a plan to coordinate a press conference later in the week. Rogers ate, visibly relieved and emboldened. promised to stand by Amanda's side. Even so, Jacob scanned the grounds before they left, making certain nothing lurked in the shadows. On the drive back to the mansion, Amanda seemed buoyed by a rare sense of optimism. "I can't believe it went so smoothly," she said, fiddling with her phone to send updates to Karen. "Rogers sounded sincere for once. If he follows through, this is the break we needed." Jacob nodded, but his gaze lingered on the rearview mirror, eyeing the traffic behind them. "It is good news, but let's not drop our guard. There's a strong chance Wilson and his associates will retaliate. Rogers defecting from their plan is a big blow." Amanda's phone chimed with a message. She glanced at it and her face lit up. "Karen says Michelle's statement has been officially notarized. We can incorporate it into the press conference. This is coming together, Jacob." He managed a faint smile. "It's progress, but keep in mind what we're dealing with. Powerful people who are used to getting their way. They might not let this stand without a fight." She gave a sober nod. "You're right. Let's finalize everything with the rest of the team." They returned to find Paul pacing in Amanda's study, a cell phone pressed to his ear. As soon as they stepped inside, he hung up and hurried over. "We've got a problem," he said, voice low. "Rumors are circulating that Baxter Wilson's group is planning a serious move. I'm hearing chatter from my sources, whispers about taking care of Collins once and for all." Amanda's face went pale. "So the gloves are off." Paul ran a hand through his hair. "Seems so. The success at Rogers's place might have triggered this." Jacob felt a jolt of tension rocket through him. "We knew they'd respond, but if they're escalating, we need to be 2 steps ahead." Nate entered, catching the tail end of the conversation. "So we fortify. We keep Amanda out of sight unless absolutely necessary. Double every checkpoint." Amanda lifted a hand to quell the rising anxiety. "We can't hide forever. We have a press conference scheduled. I need to be there if we want to make these revelations hit the news cycle properly." An uneasy silence fell, broken finally by Karen, who stepped in with measured calm. "What if we arrange a secure location for the press conference, something the police can seal off, then we transport Amanda there in an unmarked vehicle at the last minute?" Amanda considered it. "That could work. Let's coordinate with the DA's office. They're officially part of this, so maybe they can help," Jacob agreed. "Yes. Meanwhile, I'll stay close to you. If Wilson's group tries anything, they'll have to go through me." A moment passed as the group exchanged determined looks. The atmosphere was grim, yet laced with a steely resolve. They had come too far to back down now. Over the next few days, the team solidified their strategy. Karen and Lucinda Marquez coordinated media invitations on short notice, ensuring the event remained semi-secret until the morning of the announcement. Nate delegated additional guards to watch Amanda's home and office around the clock. Paul gathered final documents, cross-referencing names with bank statements that placed Baxter Wilson at the center of the corruption web. All the while, Jacob felt the weight of his own responsibilities. He rarely left Amanda's side, accompanying her on quick trips between the mansion and her law firm. One evening, on the short ride back from a late-night client meeting, Amanda turned to him, her voice tinged with a mix of appreciation and concern. "You've sacrificed a lot for me, Jacob. Your time, your peace of mind," she said, resting a hand over the folder in her lap. "I hope you know how grateful I am." He glanced at her briefly, then returned his eyes to the road. "It's not just about you," he said quietly. "It's about doing what's right. I left the force because I thought I couldn't handle failing again. But being here, protecting you, it's helped me see that I still have something valuable to offer." She watched him, silent for a moment. "You've saved me more than once, literally and figuratively." Jacob felt a flicker of warmth at her words. "Let's not celebrate too soon." We have a press conference that could set off a firestorm. We have to stay focused. Amanda nodded. I know. Still, I wanted to say it now, in case things get complicated. They pulled into the mansion's driveway, the headlights illuminating the front gates. Jacob parked, turning off the engine. As they stepped out, he noticed she lingered near him, as though seeking reassurance. He obliged by offering a faint, confident nod. The truth was, he also drew comfort from her presence, an unspoken connection formed through facing adversity side by side. Inside, the mansion was quieter than usual, with security personnel stationed discreetly. Karen had left a note saying she'd gone to finalize press logistics. Nate was checking the perimeter. Paul was hunched over his laptop in the study. Amanda paused at the base of the grand staircase. Tomorrow, we make everything public. No more secrets. It feels like stepping off a cliff, hoping we land on solid ground. Jacob removed his jacket and draped it over a chair. We'll be ready. She managed a small, determined smile. I believe we will. They parted ways, each consumed by thoughts of the looming showdown. Jacob climbed the steps to his room, each footstep echoing in the hush of the corridor. In less than 24 hours, the fate of Amanda's case, and perhaps their own futures, would be tested in a confrontation he sensed could change both of their lives forever. Dawn broke over Los Angeles with a brilliant wash of orange and pink. The sky seemed to promise clarity, but beneath that serene canvas, a storm was brewing. Amanda's mansion was a hive of activity. Guards in earpieces strode purposefully around the grounds. Karen and Lucinda huddled over laptops at the dining table, and Nate paced by the entrance, checking his watch repeatedly. In the study, Amanda stood by a mirror, smoothing out a tailored black blazer. Her expression was resolute, but Jacob noted the slight tremor in her fingers. He stepped inside quietly. She caught his reflection. "Good morning," she said softly, turning to face him. He nodded. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, exhaling sharply. "It's surreal, about to stand before cameras and name these people publicly." "Just remember, you're doing the right thing," he said. "The evidence is solid. Rogers is backing you. Michelle has sworn statements. This is our moment to shine a light on everything." Amanda straightened, her eyes searching his face. "I'm grateful you're here, Jacob. I couldn't do this alone." He offered a tight smile. "Let's focus on making sure nothing goes wrong during that press conference." At mid-morning, a small convoy left the mansion. Amanda and Jacob rode in an unmarked sedan, while Karen, Lucinda, and Nate followed behind in another car. Police escorts blended in with traffic to avoid drawing attention. They headed for a secure auditorium on the outskirts of downtown, a location arranged by the district attorney's office, surrounded by officers loyal to the cause. Upon arrival, the heightened security was immediately apparent. Metal detectors at the entrance, uniformed officers patrolling the perimeter, sniffer dogs checking every corner. Amanda, accompanied by Jacob, slipped in through a side door to avoid the crowd of reporters gathering at the main entrance. Inside the auditorium, bright overhead lights illuminated a stage with a podium bearing the seal of Los Angeles County. Rows of folding chairs faced it, gradually filling with journalists, lawyers, and a few public figures. Gerald Rogers stood near the backstage curtains, talking quietly with the district attorney's representative. He offered Amanda a curt nod when she arrived, the tension in his shoulders betraying his nerves. Lucinda guided Amanda to a small conference room where they could finalize notes. Karen fussed over the lighting, ensuring it wouldn't wash Amanda out. Jacob stood just outside the door, scanning the hallway, mindful of any suspicious movement. At last, the moment approached. The district attorney's representative stepped onto the stage. greeting the audience with a short statement about corruption in city governance. Then he introduced Amanda Collins. Walking onto the stage, Amanda faced a sea of cameras, microphones, and determined faces. Jacob watched from the wings, heart hammering in solidarity. She cleared her throat, her voice resonating with the professionalism and conviction she had honed in countless courtrooms. For years, we've suspected a network of corruption involving powerful individuals and public funds, she began. Today, we present new, irrefutable evidence, backed by sworn statements from multiple witnesses. She lifted a folder and recited key findings: fraudulent property deals, money laundering through shell corporations like Arvasex Solutions, political bribes. The names of Baxter Wilson and others peppered her speech, each accusation landing like a hammer blow. Gasps and furious scribbling from the press punctuated her words. Gerald Rogers stepped forward, voice unsteady but resolute, confirming his personal knowledge of illicit transactions. Michelle Hayes, her face blurred in a pre-recorded video statement, recounted threats aimed at silencing her. The crowd murmured in shock. Camera shutters whirred. Jacob Bestey, from his vantage point, noticed a figure entering the auditorium's rear, a tall man with silver hair, vaguely familiar. Something about him rang alarm bells in Jacob's mind. He tapped Nate's shoulder, gesturing subtly. Nate nodded and peeled off to investigate. Meanwhile, on stage, Amanda concluded, "We are calling on the city, on law enforcement, and on citizens everywhere to demand accountability. Corruption won't end if it stays hidden in the dark. Today, we shine a light." A burst of questions flooded from the reporters. Amanda fielded them with a calm firmness, occasionally deferring to the district attorney's representative. Rogers answered queries about his past complicity, admitting mistakes but emphasizing his resolve to come clean. Despite the tension, the press conference seemed to be achieving exactly what they wanted: a public, undeniable disclosure of the corruption ring's players. Suddenly, Jacob heard Nate's voice crackle through his earpiece. "Jacob, we've got an issue. The man with silver hair. It's the same guy we encountered at the charity event. He's not armed, but he's definitely not press. I'm having him escorted out." Jacob tensed. "Good work. Keep me updated." He glanced at Amanda, who was handing off the microphone to the DA's rep. She caught his eye, a flicker of concern in her gaze. But he offered a reassuring nod. Everything seemed under control. For now. As the press conference wound down, applause mingled with the clamoring of reporters eager for more details. Amanda stepped off the stage, face shining with equal parts relief and apprehension. Jacob approached, noticing the slight tremble in her hands. "You did it," he said quietly. "You got the evidence out in the open?" She managed a small smile. "Yes, but now the real fallout begins." They were ushered backstage, where Karen and Lucinda offered congratulations and hurried instructions about media follow-ups. Rogers lingered, looking dazed but hopeful. The district attorney's office staff were already preparing official statements to file charges against several of the named individuals. On paper, they had won a major victory. Yet Jacob knew the most dangerous moments often followed such a public confrontation. Their enemies, exposed and humiliated, might lash out in desperation. "Stay close," Jacob reminded Amanda, gently touching her elbow. "We're not out of the woods yet." She nodded, grateful for his steady presence. Reporters swarmed the stage, cameras flashing, but Amanda Collins and her team had made their stand. Whatever came next, there was no turning back. The flurry of post-conference activity descended like a storm. As soon as Amanda stepped off stage, a swarm of reporters pressed in, microphones thrust forward, voices battling to be heard. "Who else is implicated? Are you afraid for your safety? What legal repercussions do you anticipate?" Security personnel formed a human barrier, guiding Amanda and her team toward a private hallway. Jacob stayed at her side, gently but firmly parting the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing Amanda's determined face, Karen's anxious gestures, and Jacob's intense vigilance. With her official testimony and the evidence laid bare, their fight had gone from covert threats to headline news overnight. Once they made it behind a locked door, Amanda leaned against the wall, catching her breath. Karen smoothed back her hair, while Nate and a pair of uniformed officers stood guard outside. "Are you okay?" Jacob asked, keeping his voice low. Amanda nodded, though her face was drawn. "I never realized how draining it would be to stand up there in front of everyone, naming these people publicly." Karen glanced at her phone. "We've already received calls from multiple media outlets requesting interviews. The story's blowing up online too. Hashtags with your name are trending." Amanda closed her eyes for a moment. "And Baxter Wilson." Karen's voice softened. "He's trending too, though I doubt in the way he'd like. People are demanding his arrest." Jacob stiffened, recalling the silver-haired figure Nate had confronted. "We need to leave soon. Once Wilson's camp sees this, they might make a move. The safer we are, the better." Amanda pushed off the wall. "Agreed. Let's get back to the mansion. We can regroup from there." They exited through a rear entrance guarded by local police. A car pulled up, an unmarked SUV arranged for extraction. Jacob helped Amanda inside, with Nate taking the front passenger seat. Karen and Lucinda would follow in a separate vehicle. As they pulled away, Jacob scanned the side mirrors. The day was sunny and clear, but the tension inside the SUV felt thick. They weren't on the road long when Nate's phone buzzed. He read a text message, eyes darkening. "We have a tip from Paul," he said, turning to Amanda and Jacob. "A known associate of Baxter Wilson was spotted near the mansion about an hour ago." "Looking for me?" Amanda asked, a note of strain in her voice. "Probably," Nate replied. "Paul told him to leave the property, but the associate claimed he was just in the neighborhood. We suspect he was scouting." Jacob's jaw tightened. "We might be walking into a trap," Nate grunted. "Could be. We've got extra guards, but we should be prepared for anything." Amanda's features hardened. "It's too late to stay hidden. The press conference is done. The evidence is out. If Wilson or his cronies want a showdown, fine. We'll be ready." Jacob admired her resolve, but worried about the cost. They had pushed their enemies into a corner, and cornered adversaries were the most dangerous. "Just keep your guard up." No matter what. Arriving at the mansion, they were greeted by a swirl of activity. Additional security vehicles lined the driveway, and Paul stood on the front step, his phone pressed to his ear. He waved them in hurriedly. "We've had 2 suspicious vehicles cruise past in the last 15 minutes, Paul said, voice tense. "No direct confrontation, but they're definitely looking for a weakness." Amanda exhaled sharply. "Have we contacted the police again?" "On it," Paul replied, his eyes flicking from one face to another. "They're sending a patrol to maintain a presence, but I don't think Wilson's group will attack openly with that many uniforms around." Jacob noticed Amanda's hands trembling slightly as she set her briefcase down. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let's get you inside." "You need a moment to catch your breath," she complied, her eyes betraying the stress that accompanied this new level of exposure. They retreated to the study, where Karen already waited, scanning updates on her tablet. Karen looked up, nodding grimly. "The media reaction is massive, Amanda. There's an outpouring of support from civic groups, and some politicians are calling for immediate investigations." Amanda sank onto the couch. "Good. That means they won't be able to sweep this under the rug, but it also means the people we exposed have nothing left to lose." Jacob perched on the edge of a nearby armchair. "Let's ensure we have a plan for every scenario. We've done the big reveal. Now we fortify until arrests can be made." Nate entered the study, arms folded. I've reorganized the security team. We'll have 3 guards patrolling outside, plus a rotating shift inside. No one comes near Amanda without clearance. Karen added, I've also arranged a safe room in the basement, reinforced doors, emergency phone lines, the works. If anything happens, we can get Amanda there quickly. Amanda looked from Nate to Karen, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Then she turned to Jacob. This feels surreal. I'm a lawyer. My battleground is the courtroom. Now, it's my own home that's turning into a fortress. Jacob softened his tone. It won't be forever. Once the authorities move in, we'll see progress. Our job is to keep you protected until that happens. A phone buzzed again, making everyone flinch slightly. Karen glanced at her screen. An email just came in from the district attorney's office. They're fast-tracking warrants for several figures. Could be out by tomorrow. A subdued sense of triumph rippled through the group, quickly dampened by the realization that the night might be perilous. Amanda rose from the couch, shoulders squared. Then we hold the line. No one backs down. Tomorrow, the law steps in. She exchanged a meaningful look with Jacob, whose silent nod conveyed his unwavering commitment. For better or worse, they had crossed the threshold. The truth was out. The city was listening. And as the sun set behind the mansion's tall hedges, the stage was set for what would come next, whether it was the relief of justice served or one final, desperate gambit by those determined to silence Amanda Collins forever. Morning arrived with an unusual hush around Amanda's mansion. The staff moved quietly through the corridors, and the security detail maintained a vigilant watch on the gates. Only the steady hum of L.A. Traffic beyond the high walls reminded everyone that life outside still buzzed with excitement and uncertainty. In the study, Amanda sat at her desk, scanning the latest news coverage on her laptop. The press conference from the previous day had exploded across every major media outlet. Images of her standing at the podium were front-page stories on local news websites, accompanied by headlines about corruption, arrests, and the possibility of major political upheaval. A swirl of coffee in her mug reflected her restless state as she clicked through article after article, each more sensational than the last. Jacob stood near the window, arms folded, keeping an eye on the driveway. He could see uniformed officers patrolling the grounds, and beyond them, the occasional flash of a camera lens from a determined reporter camped outside the perimeter. They're hungry for more quotes, he commented quietly, noticing her concerned expression. That, or a dramatic angle for the evening broadcast. Amanda rubbed her forehead. I'm just glad I'm not alone in this. The DA's office has stepped up too. They're making moves to secure warrants against the main players we named. If all goes well, Baxter Wilson might find himself behind bars soon. Karen walked in, tablet in hand. We have a small update. The judge assigned to expedite those warrants is reviewing the paperwork now. It could still take a day or two. Meanwhile, a few folks from the city council are calling for your immediate testimony under oath. Amanda glanced at Karen. They want me to appear at City Hall. Karen nodded. Exactly. They're framing it as a chance for you to clarify the allegations. But it might be a trap for political theater or intimidation tactics, especially if any compromised officials are still lurking. Jacob moved away from the window. You're not going anywhere without a solid plan. We can't risk you walking into a hostile environment right now. Amanda nodded. Agreed. Let's hold off on responding until we know who's backing that request. I'd like Paul to dig into which council members are pushing for it. Karen made a note on her tablet. I'll get in touch with him right away. As Karen left, Amanda sighed, leaning back in her chair. The weight of the city's reaction pressed down on her. In her years of practicing law, she had never felt so personally exposed. There was a difference between representing a client and becoming the focal point of an entire scandal. "Every step feels like walking a tightrope," she murmured. Jacob approached her desk, resting a hand on its wooden edge. "We'll navigate it. The news coverage is definitely on our side. Public sentiment favors you. People respect bravery." "Maybe," Amanda said softly, "but that might make Wilson's associates even more desperate to strike now, before any arrests happen." Jacob didn't deny the possibility. He simply nodded, offering a calm reassurance with his eyes. "I'll double-check perimeter security. If you need to go anywhere, we'll plan it down to the last detail." Later that day, the mansion received an unexpected visitor. Miguel Vasquez, Jacob's old friend from the LAPD. He arrived in a police cruiser, stepping out with a purposeful stride. Jacob greeted him in the foyer, mindful of the uniformed officers watching closely. "Miguel," Jacob said, offering a handshake. "Didn't expect to see you in person." Miguel returned the handshake, a quick, supportive squeeze. "I have some news. Thought it best to deliver face to face." Amanda, who had just come downstairs, paused at the foot of the grand staircase. Miguel inclined his head politely, then turned to Jacob. "We've got intel that Baxter Wilson might attempt to flee the state. A source spotted him talking to a private pilot. That could mean he's about to skip town." Amanda's eyes narrowed. "If he disappears, it'll be a lot harder to bring him to justice. Can the LAPD or the DA's office do anything?" Miguel shrugged, removing his cap. "We only have circumstantial proof he's planning to run. Without the finalized warrant, we can't legally detain him. Our hands are tied until the paperwork comes through." A frustrated silence settled. Amanda's grip on the banister tightened. "This is the problem with bureaucracy. If we lose him now—" Jacob placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let's hope the judge signs those documents fast." Miguel glanced around, taking in the heightened security inside the mansion. "Looks like you've got quite the setup here." "Good. Keep it that way. The minute Wilson realizes you're close to shutting him down, he might lash out." Amanda thanked him, her expression resolute yet haunted by the possibility of losing her key suspect to an escape plan. After Miguel left, she retreated to the study again, flipping through phone messages and emails. Each unanswered ring or hastily written note reminded her that this entire effort could unravel if their enemies slipped away or struck back in one desperate maneuver. Jacob hovered near the doorway. "You're safe here," he reiterated. "We'll keep pressing. We might not control everything, but we can control how prepared we are." Amanda looked up from her desk, forcing a small nod. "Let's get in touch with Paul, see if he can confirm Wilson's whereabouts. We might need to take our own precautions if the law can't move fast enough." A flicker of determination revived in her eyes, and Jacob recognized the attorney who refused to back down in court. Whatever fears gnawed at her, Amanda Collins wasn't about to fold. She would fight for the city that was now turning its gaze upon her, counting on her to expose the ugly truth. And Jacob, having found a renewed purpose in her service, intended to stand at her side until the end, no matter the outcome. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the mansion's windows as Paul returned with an update on Baxter Wilson's status. Huddled in the study, the core team, Amanda, Jacob, Karen, Nate, and Paul, listened intently as he shared everything he had discovered. "Wilson's definitely trying to secure a flight out of Los Angeles," Paul began, flipping open a laptop to show a map of a private airstrip near the coast. "We have partial confirmation he's in negotiations with a shady charter service. However, there's no direct evidence linking him to Avasec Solutions yet, at least not enough to trigger an immediate arrest." Amanda leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "Even if he flees, we have his associates to pursue. But capturing him in custody would be far more impactful." Karen frowned, reviewing notes on her tablet. I've contacted several journalists we trust. They're running with the story that Wilson is fleeing. Public outrage is growing." Paul arched an eyebrow. "Public outrage won't stop a plane from taking off." Jacob decided to break the tension by asking the next critical question. "What do we do if the authorities can't move quickly enough? Should we let them know about this runway?" Amanda's gaze shifted between the faces in the room. "We're talking about interfering with a possible escape. That's not exactly within our power. But maybe the district attorney's office can coordinate with the local police or even the FBI to monitor that airstrip." Nate spoke up in his usual no-nonsense tone. "We should also be prepared for retaliation. Wilson could send people after you as a diversion, giving him time to flee. Heightened vigilance around the mansion remains essential." Amanda rubbed her forehead. "Agreed. Let's keep a close watch until tomorrow morning. By then, we might have those official warrants." Night fell more calmly than anyone had expected. Still, inside the mansion, tension buzzed under each conversation. Over a quick dinner in the dining room, the team discussed everything from potential safe houses to rotating guard shifts. Harold Knight, Amanda's elderly groundskeeper and occasional driver, placed fresh linens in the guest rooms, preparing for the possibility of an extended siege. Even the usually unflappable household staff appeared on edge. After dinner, Jacob stepped out onto the mansion's veranda, needing a breath of fresh air. The sprawling backyard stretched into carefully manicured gardens, lit by discreet pathway lights. As he wandered, he heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Amanda approaching, a light shawl draped over her shoulders. "I needed a moment of quiet," she said softly, joining him in the mild evening air. "Inside feels stifling with all the stress." Jacob offered a small grin, leaning against the ornate railing. "Hard to believe we're in L.A., yet it's so peaceful out here. It feels like another world compared to what's happening outside these walls." Amanda turned her gaze to the moonlit garden, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I wonder if I've let my work consume me too completely. My home has become an office, a fortress, and now a stage for the city's biggest scandal." He didn't respond immediately, letting her words linger. The faint chirp of crickets filled the silence. Finally, he said, "Your work is important. Without you, these crimes might never have come to light." She gave a half-smile tinged with sadness. "But at what cost? My personal life is non-existent, and the stress on everyone around me is immense, especially you, Jacob. You left a quiet existence to dive back into danger." He shifted slightly, thinking about his former life as a cop and the drifting he had done afterward. "I wasn't exactly fulfilled as a night shift security guard. I think protecting you has given me a sense of purpose again. It reminded me there's a reason I joined law enforcement in the first place." Amanda tilted her head, studying him. "And how are you handling it emotionally? You've mentioned your past regrets, losing your partner. Is this dredging up old wounds?" Jacob exhaled, recalling the night his partner, Randall, had been shot. "Sometimes, but it also feels like redemption. I made mistakes, but now I'm doing what I can to make a difference. At least this time, I'm not alone in the fight." Her eyes shone with empathy. "You're definitely not alone." A mild breeze rustled the hedges, and they lapsed into a gentle hush, standing side by side under the starlight. Jacob felt a quiet bond forming, an understanding built not on words alone, but on shared fears and hopes. "We should get some rest," Amanda finally said, her tone warm but weary. "Tomorrow could be a pivotal day if the DA secures those warrants. Everything might change again." Jacob nodded. "I'll be up early, checking the perimeter. Let me know if you need anything during the night." She touched his arm lightly, a fleeting but genuine gesture of gratitude. Then she turned and walked back inside, leaving him with the soft glow of garden lights and the flicker of an emotion he could no longer ignore. a cautious but growing affection for the person whose life he'd been entrusted to protect. Sighing, he raked a hand through his hair and followed her into the mansion, determined to remain vigilant no matter what the next day might bring. At first light, Jacob joined Karen and Nate in the security command room, a spare guest suite that had been turned into a surveillance hub. Computer monitors displayed live feeds from cameras around the mansion's perimeter. Karen sipped coffee, eyes scanning the screens, while Nate checked in with 2 guards posted along the outer fence. So far, no sign of suspicious activity, Nate reported, rubbing the back of his neck. We're getting partial updates from the DA's office. Warrants are still pending a final signature. Karen blew out a breath. At least no news is better than bad news. Jacob frowned slightly, recalling the sense of urgency around Baxter Wilson's rumored escape. We should keep an eye on that airstrip. Any new intel from Paul? Karen tapped her tablet. He's been trying to confirm if Wilson actually boarded a plane last night. So far, there's no record of any unauthorized flights. Jacob allowed himself a small relief. Maybe Wilson realized it's too late to run without raising red flags. The next hour trickled by in tense anticipation until Paul finally called. Karen answered on speaker. Paul, any breakthroughs? Paul's voice crackled through. Yes. The warrants are officially signed. The DA's about to dispatch teams to pick up everyone named, including Baxter Wilson. He'll also ask for assistance from state or federal agents if needed. Karen flashed Jacob and Nate an excited grin. Jacob gave a brief nod, but caution still lingered. That's a big step, Paul. Any sign of pushback from inside the system? A pause on the line. Not so far. It's possible the corrupt insiders are scrambling for cover. Anyway, it looks like they'll try to arrest Wilson today. I'll keep you posted. The call ended, leaving the 3 of them feeling a surge of optimism, tempered by the knowledge that a cornered figure might lash out. Word spread quickly through the household. Staff members, who had grown accustomed to a climate of hushed fear, brightened at the possibility that the worst might soon be over. Amanda, after speaking with the DA herself, retreated to the study with a trembling smile, phone still in hand. Jacob found her there, pacing by the window. She turned at his arrival. They're going for Wilson today. This is the moment we've waited for. He caught the anxiety in her eyes, hidden just beneath her hopeful tone. We'll stay on high alert. If he tries anything, we'll be ready. She nodded, pressing her phone to her chest. I'm already drafting statements in case the media wants an immediate reaction once they announce his arrest. Karen appeared in the doorway, carrying a folder. Amanda, I have a request from the local law school. They want you to speak in a virtual guest lecture about this case. They say it would be an invaluable lesson for aspiring attorneys. Amanda looked momentarily taken aback. A guest lecture. My focus right now is on ensuring these arrests go smoothly. Karen held out the folder. They know that, but they see you as a role model for legal ethics under pressure. They're curious how you balance the moral implications, the threats, and the public disclosures. Amanda's cheeks warmed. I never intended to become a teaching figure. I was just doing what I had to do. Jacob watched her reaction, remembering how she once believed she had to go it alone. Now people wanted her to share those lessons. You've handled everything under extraordinary circumstances, he pointed out. Why not share the insight with future lawyers? It could do some good. She pursed her lips, then took the folder from Karen. All right, once the arrests are complete and things calm down a bit, I'll consider it. Karen offered a small grin, then left them alone again. Amanda stared at the folder, a reflective look crossing her features. Funny how life turns out, she said quietly. A few weeks ago, I was just a lawyer with a big case. Now I'm part of a story people want to learn from. Jacob stepped closer. You showed everyone that standing up for what's right still matters. That's a lesson worth sharing, she nodded, placing the folder on her desk. I guess so. Let's hope the next chapter of this story includes actual justice. Her voice faltered slightly at the last word, the weight of their quest settling over them again. Jacob placed a reassuring hand on the back of her chair. It's coming. One step at a time. They spent the rest of the afternoon exchanging updates with Paul and the DA's office. The net was closing around Baxter Wilson and his co-conspirators. With each hour, it felt more and more likely that all the tension they had endured, the threats, the infiltration attempts, the pressure, would finally amount to the triumph of truth. Still, none of them could fully relax. By early evening, the sky darkened and a hush fell over the mansion once more. Amanda found a moment to email the law school, her curiosity piqued despite herself. She wrote a few lines about the importance of moral courage and the complexities of fighting hidden corruption, then saved the draft. It felt surreal, imagining how her ordeal could become a case study for others. Yet a flicker of pride warmed her chest at the thought of turning personal struggle into broader lessons. The day passed without word of Wilson's arrest, but the anticipation hung thick in the air. Night settled in, bringing a cautious sense of relief that no attacks had materialized. As Amanda locked up her study, she paused by the window, gazing at the security lights illuminating the lawn. Somewhere out there, forces she had challenged were facing the imminent reality of justice. And in this brief lull, she allowed herself to hope that when the sun rose again, the city would begin to shift toward a brighter path, one shaped by accountability and the courage of those who refused to stay silent. The following morning, Amanda awoke to her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. She bolted upright, heart racing, half expecting bad news about another threat or a thwarted escape. Instead, she found a flurry of messages from Karen, Paul, and the DA's office. Blinking away sleep, she skimmed the texts, eyes widening at the headlines. Baxter Wilson in custody. Large-scale operation busts key members of corruption network. Amanda Collins's evidence leads to early morning arrests. A shaky sigh of relief escaped her lips. She threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, nearly tripping in her rush to share the good news. She found Jacob in the hallway, wearing the same concerned expression until he saw her face. "They got him?" he asked, voice taut with anticipation. She nodded rapidly. "Yes, and several others. It sounds like the DA coordinated with federal agents. Baxter Wilson was arrested at the private hangar we discussed. Looks like our intel was right. He was literally on his way to board a plane." Jacob let out a sharp breath. "Thank God. That means the immediate threat should ease up." Amanda's smile lit her features, though her eyes shone with unspent tension. "We did it, Jacob. Or at least, we got to the point where law enforcement could do their job." Karen and Nate emerged from another room, each holding phones and looking equally stunned by the positive news. A collective wave of relief swept them, punctuated by a few exclamations of excitement. For a moment, the mansion felt like the site of a small victory party, though security still patrolled outside. The morning turned into a blur of phone calls and messages of congratulations. Amanda fielded requests for statements from news outlets. Karen handled scheduling for interviews and official press releases. Paul arrived in person, beaming from ear to ear, to confirm that multiple figures named in the corruption ring were now in custody. The justice system would take over from here, but the foundation laid by Amanda's evidence ensured these individuals would not simply walk away. By noon, the mood in the mansion had shifted from tense vigilance to measured celebration. The staff moved about with lighter steps, and Amanda finally allowed herself a proper breakfast, a stack of pancakes served in the sunny breakfast nook. Jacob joined her, sipping coffee and observing the transformation in her demeanor. "Feels different already, doesn't it?" he ventured, eyeing the swirl of syrup on her plate. Amanda nodded, though her posture remained dignified. "Yes, but I'm also aware it's not over. We'll have trials, testimonies, appeals. It could take months or years to unravel the entire network." Jacob leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You'll still be in the spotlight for a while. People will want to credit you for exposing this." "You prepared for that?" She paused, meeting his gaze with a hint of uncertainty. "I don't know if anyone is ever fully prepared to become a public figure. But I'm determined not to lose sight of who I am, or the work that remains." He reached out, resting a comforting hand over hers for a brief moment. "Then you'll handle it. You've proved your strength over and over." Her cheeks warmed faintly, but she didn't pull away. The conversation lingered there, a quiet intimacy forming between them, one shaped by mutual respect and the fires they had walked through together. By late afternoon, a sense of normalcy began to creep back into the mansion. Officers stationed around the property received orders to scale back their presence. The immediate threat level was significantly reduced now that Baxter Wilson and his top associates were under arrest. Nate oversaw the process, ensuring a smooth transition. Karen and Lucinda worked on a final media statement, emphasizing how the evidence Amanda collected would be used in court. A sense of pride glimmered in Karen's eyes, as if she, too, had found new purpose in aiding this cause. The household staff, no longer braced for crisis, chatted happily in the corridors, and the tension that once thickened the air was gone. Miguel dropped by in a squad car, stepping into the foyer with a tired but gratified smile. "Took a lot of people working together, but we got him," he told Jacob. "I wish I could have done more from the inside, but the important thing is, it's done." Jacob shook his friend's hand. "You did plenty. I appreciate everything." Amanda approached, offering Miguel her thanks as well. The officer waved it off modestly. "Just doing my job, and I respect how you did yours, Ms. Collins." Then, with a playful grin, he nudged Jacob. "You look like you found your spark again, buddy. Maybe this is your calling, private security work for the good guys." Jacob laughed softly. "Let's just say I'm not done figuring out my next steps." Amanda smiled at that, as if she, too, wondered what path Jacob might follow once the dust settled. As evening approached, a subtle calm enveloped the mansion. The front gates, while still monitored, were no longer sealed tight. Karen left early, eager to catch up on lost sleep. Nate prepared to rotate the guard schedule in a less urgent manner. Paul reviewed the last of his investigative files, satisfied that the immediate danger had passed. Jacob found Amanda in the study, tidying stacks of legal papers. She seemed more relaxed, though a familiar glimmer of purpose lit her eyes. "I'll be working with the DA's office for the next few months," she said, placing a binder on a shelf, "helping them prepare the prosecution against Wilson and his associates. It's going to be a mountain of paperwork, but it'll be worth it." Jacob tucked his hands into his pockets. "You've been living under threat for so long. I hope you can take a moment to breathe, too." She turned, scanning his face. "I will. And I also plan to do that guest lecture at the law school. It seems right to pass on what I've learned about justice, perseverance, and the cost of standing up to corruption." He nodded, a faint, genuine smile on his lips. "You'll inspire a lot of people." Stepping closer, she studied him for a quiet beat. "And what about you, Jacob? You came here to protect me, but it feels like you did a lot more than that." He shrugged, remembering the man he was before all this, haunted by guilt, aimless. "I don't have all the answers. But I know I'm not the same person I was. Working this case made me realize I can still do good in the world, that I shouldn't let my past define me." She nodded, understanding reflecting in her eyes. Whatever path you choose next, I want you to know you're always welcome here, whether I need your protection or just your company. A soft warmth passed between them. Then, with a shared sense of having reached a threshold, they turned toward the corridor, the hush of the mansion embracing them. Outside, the city lights glimmered as they always did. But for Amanda Collins and Jacob Miller, everything felt transformed. The threats had forced them both to question who they were and what they stood for. And in that search, they had discovered not just the strength to confront corruption, but a deeper resilience and hope within themselves. They walked side by side, leaving the study's light behind, each step echoing with the quiet promise of renewal. No final words were spoken. Their story was still unfolding, shaped by the trials they had overcome and the possibilities that lay ahead. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.